Male dormitory, Beijing University. This weather's driving me crazy, Bai Zemin muttered, staring out the rain-streaked window. It wasn't just rain. It was a torrential downpour, a curtain of water hammering the earth without pause. The rhythmic patter against the glass might have been calming under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal times. Over the past year, the global climate had spiraled into chaos. One day, deserts were swallowed by violent storms. The next, polar ice caps began to melt only to refreeze hours later under sudden cold snaps. Scientists grasped at theories, blaming everything from ozone degradation to magnetic anomalies. But no explanation truly held up. People stopped trusting forecasts. The sky might be clear now, but everyone carried umbrellas, unsure if the next minute would bring sunshine or lightning. And now I have to work in this crap, Bai Zemin grumbled, peeling himself away from the window to dig through his closet for something warm. He was just an ordinary 20-year-old student. No rich family, no powerful connections. His father worked as a mid-level civil servant, and his mother taught elementary English. A humble life, lived quietly. But his family had one addition that made things different: Meng-Chi. His mother's best friend had died when Bai Zemin was 12, leaving behind a sweet, quiet girl 3 years younger. With no one willing to take her in, his mother had opened their doors and hearts to her. Since then, Meng-Chi had been like a younger sister. She now attended an elite high school and was set to join Beijing University next year. As Bai Zemin was selecting a sweater, the world suddenly lurched. The ground shuddered violently. Furniture groaned. Paintings fell from the walls. He instinctively clung to the closet, his body swaying as the dorm room quaked. A strange force pulsed through him, like being punched in the gut by something invisible. He doubled over, pale-faced, resisting the urge to vomit. And then, silence. The shaking stopped. The room settled. The storm outside continued as if nothing had happened. Bai Zemin took a shaky breath. But before he could process what had just occurred, a green, translucent screen flickered into view, right before his eyes. The Soul Record has arrived on planet Earth. You may now access your status window at will. For first-time users, the window will open automatically. What? Another screen followed. Bai Zemin. A level, 0. Race, human. Job, none. Title, none. Strength, 12-10. Agility, 11-10. Health, 10-10. Stamina, 10-10. Mana, 109-0. Magic, 109-10. His eyes widened. Magic? He wasn't dreaming. This was real. A status screen like in games and light novels. And he apparently had a terrifyingly high magical potential. Suddenly, a soft, sultry voice interrupted his thoughts, one that somehow felt innocent and wicked all at once. Interesting, to think I'd find a human with such a high affinity for magic so soon after arriving in this lower realm. Bai Zemin turned and froze. A woman stood there, impossibly beautiful. Her skin was as pale as moonlight, unblemished and smooth. Her long black hair cascaded like silk to her waist, contrasting with glowing ruby-red eyes that seemed to pierce into his soul. She wore a form-fitting black dress that traced every seductive curve of her figure, exposing her flawless arms and long, smooth legs. There had been no one in the room seconds ago, yet here she was. Before he could speak, screams shattered the silence. Instinct pulled Bai Zemin to the window. Outside, the world had fallen into madness. People were running, shrieking, scattering in all directions. Others, if they could still be called people, chased them with blank eyes and bloody mouths. Biting, ripping, devouring. A girl tripped and fell, crying out for help. But no one stopped. Everyone was too busy trying to save themselves. "Watch out!" Bai Zemin yelled, but it was too late. A zombie tore into her arm, and her cries quickly faded. Soon, her body twitched and rose again. She began staggering forward, just like the rest. Bai Zemin's face turned white. Zombies? Real zombies? Then something buzzed past the window. A bee, nearly the size of a human fist. It zipped toward a zombie and, without hesitation, drove its stinger straight into its skull. The zombie dropped instantly. The bee cracked the head open and devoured something inside, then grew noticeably larger. It turned and flew straight at him, eyes wide. Bai Zemin dove for the wooden chair next to his desk. The giant bee shattered the already broken window, its bloodied stinger aimed at his face. He reacted on instinct. With a grunt, he swung the chair like a bat, striking the bee midair and slamming it into the wall. It hit the floor, twitching. Without hesitation, he raised the chair again and smashed it down, once, twice, 3 times, until the creature stopped moving. Suddenly, a glowing orb of white light floated out of the bee's corpse and entered his body. You have absorbed level 5 Big Bee's soul power. Agility +2, strength +2. Asterisk, you have reached level 1. You gain 2 stat points to allocate freely. Bai Zemin gasped. He felt it, power. Real power, blooming in his muscles, strengthening his bones. And near the bee's corpse, a strange red scroll radiated with an ominous glow. He picked it up. Skill scroll, blood manipulation, first order. A level 5. Allows limited control of your own blood or that of your enemies. Effectiveness depends on magic, mana, and imagination. Before he could react, the woman's voice returned. That's quite a powerful skill you've picked up. Bai Zemin spun around, gripping the splintered remains of the chair like a weapon. She hadn't moved an inch. He narrowed his eyes. Who are you? She smiled, her aura shifting from innocent to seductive in a blink. My name is Lilith. I'm a 6th order succubus of the demon faction. Bai Zemin stared at the woman across from him, her beauty otherworldly and her aura impossible to ignore. Yet despite her sudden appearance and bizarre claim, he didn't lose his composure. I see, he said calmly, though his grip on the broken chair remained firm. So, what exactly are you doing here? The woman, Lilith, blinked slowly, her ruby eyes glinting with amusement. You're surprisingly composed for someone who just learned a demon from another world popped into his room. I've already seen a bee the size of a melon, watched a girl get eaten alive, and got prompted by a glowing status screen like I'm in some RPG game, Bai Zemin said dryly, gesturing toward the bloodied corpse on the floor. You're just one more strange thing in a long list of today's absurdities. Lilith let out a soft giggle. You adapt quickly. I like that in a human. She tilted her head, smiling sweetly. How about becoming mine? I'll take good care of you. Bai Zemin's expression didn't change, though it took every ounce of his willpower not to flinch. This woman radiated danger, an allure like a flame luring moths to death. Thanks, but I'd rather not have my life force drained dry. He turned away from her, redirecting his focus to the glowing red scroll in his hands. You only need to will it, Lilith said lightly, her voice floating through the air like silk. The knowledge will enter your mind on its own. Taking a breath, Bai Zemin closed his eyes and did as she instructed. The moment he did, a rush of information surged through his consciousness. Symbols etched themselves into his mind, a blood-red rune burning into existence. His body tensed as he felt the blood in his veins respond, quickening as if awakening. Even Lilith's heartbeat reached his ears, calm and steady. He opened his eyes, a faint glow flickering in his gaze. You have learned an external active skill. You may learn up to 4 more external active skills. The scroll vanished from his hands, dissipating into red motes of light. Bai Zemin tried to process what he'd just learned, but before he could, a loud bang shook the room. Something was pounding against the door. More bangs followed, louder, more urgent, accompanied by guttural groans that made Bai Zemin's skin crawl. His instinct screamed, zombies. He moved fast. Ripping the cable from the back of the TV, he tied one end to the bed frame and looped the other around a desk leg, creating a tripwire a few inches off the floor. Then, without a word, he crouched beside the fallen bee and began to dig through its corpse. Lilith watched in silence, a smile playing on her lips. Bang! The door burst open. 2 former students, now pale, blood-smeared zombies, stumbled in. Their eyes were clouded, their mouths twisted in a grotesque mockery of life. If this had happened just 10 minutes earlier, Bai Zemin might have frozen in fear. But now, something was different. Was it the skill? He wondered. Or something else? He remembered something. Stress, increased blood flow, and emotion was tied to blood. Could it be that his control over blood now gave him a grip on his fear too? The zombies shuffled forward, and their feet caught on the wire. The makeshift tripline snapped taut, yanking both corpses to the ground in a heap. Without hesitation, Bai Zemin sprang into action. He grabbed the giant bee stinger he had kept nearby and rammed it into the skull of the nearest zombie. The creature twitched once, then went still. He spun, plunged the weapon into the second zombie's head, and silenced it just as fast. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie, LV4. Plus 4 stamina. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie, LV3. Plus 1 stamina. You have leveled up to level 2. Plus 2 free status points. Before he could catch his breath, 2 more zombies entered, groaning as they staggered over the corpses of their fallen kin. The wire had slackened. The trap was useless now, but Bai Zemin didn't panic. He focused, channeling the new skill he'd just learned. His mana surged. 2 dark red arrows, crafted from the congealed blood of the zombies he'd slain, shot from the ground and impaled the heads of the advancing creatures. They dropped like stones. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie, LV3. Plus 1 stamina. You have acquired the soul power of normal zombie, LV3. Bai Zemin's eyes narrowed. He noticed something. From a second zombie, he hadn't gained any stats. Lilith finally spoke. The soul strengthens through variety. Killing the same low-level creature over and over yields diminishing returns. You'll still gain experience and level up, but stat boosts will become rare unless you challenge stronger foes. Bai Zemin nodded, grateful for the clarification. He glanced at her. You still haven't answered my question. Why are you here? Lilith smiled mischievously and pointed at the open doorway. Let's save that for later. Wouldn't it be smarter to find a safer place first? He followed her gaze and grimaced. The door had been reduced to splinters. He gave a quick nod. You're right. I need to get out of here. He grabbed a mountain backpack, stuffing in water bottles, a few snack packs, and coiled up the wire he'd used earlier. Not much, but it was all he had. He walked to the window and cursed under his breath. Great 5th floor. There was no way down. No fire escape. He'd have to go through the building. Lilith's gaze lingered on the corpses as Bai Zemin moved. Her eyes glittered as she studied the bloodied remains. The precision of the kills, the control and the skill. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. This one is special. With a sway of her hips and an amused glint in her eye, she
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
As he walked down the hallway of the guy's dormitory complex, Bai Zemin had the nerves in his body tense and his muscles bulged slightly due to the tension. Because today was Saturday, most of the guys in the dormitory had gone out to enjoy the good life. Most of them could have fun during the times when studying was not necessary, as their families supported them from behind. Unfortunately, Bai Zemin's life was not so good. The salary of his father and mother together could only afford to pay for the college expenses of one of them, Bai Zemin or Meng Qi. Because of this, Bai Zemin strongly refused to accept his parents' money and started working in a repair shop near the university. That way, he could study and his younger foster sister could study as well. Although she felt guilty, there were not many options for a poor family. Lilith, who was following him step by step, suddenly said in a casual voice, "How about using the 4 free status points you have?" Bai Zemin did not look back and replied while he shook his head, "No. If I use them casually now, I might regret it later. Right now, I don't know which attribute could save my life in times of need, and a sudden impulse might be my only hope." Lilith was silent for a few seconds before nodding in understanding. She licked her lips as she looked at his back with glittering eyes and purred, "I like you more and more." Bai Zemin's breathing became slightly heavy as he heard that charming tone of voice, and it took all his willpower not to turn around to rip the clothes of the beauty behind him. Something told him that if he tried to do something like that, he would probably regret it for the rest of his life. Besides, even though she seemed to be helping him, Bai Zemin was a careful person by nature. Therefore, he was still with his guard slightly up against Lilith. Suddenly, 3 male zombies appeared at the end of the corridor, crawling towards him with trembling steps. Although these creatures gave the feeling that they might fall at any moment, their steps never missed, and they held steady as they walked slowly but surely. Bai Zemin could feel himself becoming somewhat anxious at the appearance of the 3 threats, and quickly used his skill to forcibly calm himself. He knew that losing control over his emotions at such a crucial moment could be the cause of his death. Lilith looked at his back with a smile. She was really curious to see how he would come out of this situation. Currently, there was no trap set up, nor was there any blood in the vicinity to use. While Bai Zemin could turn around and go back to his room to make use of the corpse of the zombies he had killed earlier, that would leave him exposed to more zombies coming out of the locked rooms, as the sound of banging could be heard uninterrupted. Obviously, at this rate, many zombies would soon come out and seal the way out. Bai Zemin took a deep breath and slowly walked forward while watching the movement of the zombies. They moved really slowly, but that didn't stop them from being terrifying in their own right, and as far as Bai Zemin had seen so far, a scratch meant death. He tried to make use of his blood manipulation skill, only to discover to his consternation that it seemed to have no use against these zombies. Lilith felt the flow of mana and knew what he wanted to do, so she quickly explained, "Although your skill is really strong, dead creatures are practically your nemesis during the initial stages, as these zombies feel no pain. Try to warm their blood and then guide it to the eyes." Bai Zemin's eyes flashed, and he quickly understood what the succubus behind him meant. With a thought, he spent 15 points of mana, fiercely reheat the blood inside the zombies' bodies, and guided it to the eyes. The results showed immediately. The eyes of the 3 zombies exploded due to the internal heat, and blood began to gush out like a fountain. Bai Zemin did not pass up the opportunity and spent another 30 points of mana to create 3 frozen blood arrows from the blood the creature spilled, killing the 3 zombies at the same time. You have acquired soul power of normal zombie level 3. You have acquired soul power of normal zombie level 3. You have acquired soul power of normal zombie level 3. You have leveled up to level 3. You get 2 status points to distribute freely. Bai Zemin had killed 2 other zombies after reaching level 2 in his room. One of them was level 4. With the accumulation of 3 other level 3 zombies, he leveled up again. The only regrettable thing was that he could not acquire benefits from these level 3 zombies other than experience. Every time Bai Zemin leveled up, his stats would recover to the maximum point immediately. In short, even though he had spent 20 mana points in his room and another 45 just now to defeat the zombies, his mana recovered because he had leveled up. After thinking for a moment, Bai Zemin took out a bottle of water and emptied its contents on the ground. Enduring the urge to vomit from the foul smell and bad appearance of the dead zombies, he walked over to the corpses and filled the bottle with blood. Previously, he was forced to spend 15 points of mana to force the zombies' blood out. This kind of consumption was one he could not afford. After all, he was now leveling up fast, but he knew that things would not always be so easy. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Bai Zemin's hunting became much more efficient as he went down floor by floor. Making use of the blood he had saved, he created small strings by spending only 2 points of mana, binding the movement of the zombies for a moment. Bai Zemin would take advantage of that brief moment to approach and stab the zombies' brains with the mutated bee stinger. So far, Bai Zemin had killed a total of 33 zombies from the moment he left his room. A thin strand of blood slid silently across the floor, catching one of the legs of a zombie, causing its body to almost fall and stopping it in place. Taking advantage of his 13 points of agility, which made him almost 50% faster than a normal person before the apocalypse, Bai Zemin quickly circled around and stabbed hard at the back of the zombie's head, raising the sum to 34. You have acquired soul power of normal zombie level 4. You have leveled up to level 5. You get 2 status points to distribute freely. Reading the green message flashing on his retina, Bai Zemin let out a sigh of relief. To climb from level 4 to level 5, he was forced to kill about 16 zombies, which had drained his stamina quite a bit and several mana points. Upon reaching the first floor, Bai Zemin's footsteps stopped, and he looked at the zombie blocking his path in shock. This zombie had two grotesque and powerful arms the size of a grown man's thighs. It was also taller, at least 2 meters tall. Obviously, this zombie was a more dangerous species. The hulking zombie also sensed Bai Zemin's life source less than 5 meters away and moved toward him. Although this particular zombie was slower than Bai Zemin, it was at least twice as fast as normal zombies. Taken by surprise, Bai Zemin panicked and quickly moved his head to the side, dodging the zombie's fist by a notch. Bang! The zombie's fist caused a hole in the wall behind Bai Zemin, and his face turned white as he realized that if that attack had hit him, his head would have exploded like a watermelon falling from a 10th floor. In the moment of crisis, Bai Zemin kicked with his 14 strength points forward, forcing the burly zombie back a few steps. Before the zombie could attack again, Bai Zemin threw a wave of blood into the air and directly spent 40 mana points to create 4 blood chains. Unlike the small strings of frozen blood, these blood chains looked much more robust and sturdy. After all, Bai Zemin only needed 2 or 3 mana points to create a blood string, but for these chains he had used 10 points each. Under his control, the blood chains tightly wrapped around the corpulent zombie's body, throwing it to the ground. Seeing his opponent incapacitated, Bai Zemin advanced and stabbed with a mutated bee stinger. However, to his surprise, the stinger that was even sharper than a knife had only managed to pierce a few centimeters before being stopped by the zombie's flesh. The strange zombie began to struggle in an attempt to break free, but the chains of blood clung tightly and would not allow it to break free. Still, Bai Zemin dared not relax and stabbed nonstop at the same spot over and over again. It was only after nearly 20 stabs with all his strength that he finally managed to crush the zombie's brain into a bloody mess. You have acquired Soul Power of Strength Zombie level 15. Strength plus 6, Health plus 5. You have leveled up to level 6. You have leveled up to level 7. You have leveled up to level 8. You get 2 status points to distribute freely. Bai Zemin felt his body become much more powerful than before in a matter of seconds, and the tiredness he felt after stabbing with all his might 20 times disappeared completely. What is this? Bai Zemin advanced and picked up a strange orb that had fallen from the corpse of the strength zombie. Rare Treasure Orb. Contains a rare category treasure inside. The orb was about the size of a baby's fist and orange in color. Just by grasping it, Bai Zemin immediately knew how to use the orb naturally, as if it had been something he had known all his life. Squeezing his palm tightly, the orb flashed slightly, and when the brightness dimmed, a new object appeared in Bai Zemin's hand. Xin Yuan's sword. Its power is enough to pierce through the defenses of almost any creature below level 40, and its edge capable of piercing through the defenses of an armored car. When equipped, strength plus 20. The sword was dark golden in color, with countless engravings along the blade and hilt, giving it a truly mysterious appearance. It measured just over a meter in length, and its width was approximately 4 fingers of an adult's hand. Bai Zemin slashed a couple of times and nodded in satisfaction. Although he was not at all skilled with a sword since he had never wielded one, with his Xin Yuan sword, he could finally kill enemies without having to get too close, risking his life in the process. Moreover, just by wielding the sword, his strength had directly increased by 20 points. He could feel terrifying strength circulating in his body and felt that he could crush a stone with a single fist. Curious about his current attributes, he called up his status window, and soon several green letters flashed in his retina. Bai Zemin. Status points, 16. Level 8. Race, human. Job, none. Title, none. Strength, 20 plus 20 / agility. 13 / health. 15 / stamina. 16 / mana. 109 / magic. 109. With his current 40 strength points, Bai Zemin was basically as strong as 4 people combined before the apocalypse. The feeling of growing step by step and seeing his progress before him was so intoxicating that even in such a setting he couldn't help but smile. Thanks to the fact that there were no more zombies on this floor, Bai Zemin allowed himself to rest for 5 minutes. Although he was not physically exhausted, His mental fatigue was there. 5 minutes might not be much, but it was better than nothing. Because he had used more than half of the blood he had stored against the string zombie earlier, Bai Zemin refilled the bottle with blood and walked to the exit. At this moment, the campus was as if hell had descended on Earth. Students were rushing about in a disorderly manner while being chased by zombies, oversized insects, and animals of terrifying size. These strange creatures were also killing each other. The defeated were being devoured by the victors, becoming nothing more than sources of power for others to become stronger. Many students were also bleeding while screaming and crying, constantly asking for help. Seeing this, Bai Zemin could not help but tighten his grip on the Xianyuan sword. Even if he was normally indifferent, even if he wasn't a social person with too many friends, seeing his own kind being devoured wasn't exactly pleasing to the eye. Humans kill pigs, sheep, cows, goats, and many other species to consume them and live. Lilith's voice, who had been silent all this time, echoed next to him. Now that the world has changed, humans are no longer the only ones who will hunt to survive. The sooner you accept this fact, the easier it will be for you. Bai Zemin just continued to be silent. Even if he knew that Lilith's words were the truth, it was not so simple to change his mind in a matter of minutes. However, he also knew that his number one priority was to survive. Even if he had to crawl out of the hell, he would definitely survive and search for his family. A rather pretty girl was running while a brown dog that was almost 5 feet tall was chasing her at an outrageous speed. In a matter of seconds, the giant dog pounced on the girl and threw her to the ground. The girl's eyes flashed with terror as she saw the terrifying monster open its jaws wide. Just when her throat was about to be ripped in half, there was a sharp flash that flickered for a second. Oh! The giant dog's movements stopped completely, and a second later its head detached from its body. Warm blood fell on the girl's body, but after living through so many things, she did not scream and looked at the person who had just saved her life. This person was naturally Bai Zemin. You have acquired mutated dog, level 9 soul power. Agility +4, stamina +4. Stand up and follow me if you want to live. Quickly, he urged. Without waiting for an answer, he quickly moved towards another student who was being attacked by a big bee and cut it in two with his sword. The girl quickly stood up, scared. She didn't dare to linger as she began to follow him, knowing that he was her only hope of living. The other male student also followed in Bai Zemin's footsteps without delay as he thanked him. Bai Zemin moved across the campus in the direction of the gymnasium. That was probably the only place that could currently be safe since there were no glass windows for the mutated monsters to get into. Although he urgently wanted to go find his family, he first needed to understand the situation he was in. Bai Zemin knew perfectly well that rushing things in such a crisis situation would only hasten his steps towards death. Along the way, Bai Zemin helped and saved the lives of more than 15 students. These students were all chased by animals or insects. As for those who were caught by the zombies, there was no hope for them. The zombies were not as fast as the mutated animals, nor did they have unpredictable attacks like the giant insects. On the contrary, they were extremely slow and their movements were clumsy. However, a small scratch meant death. A group of 5 students ran, while a group of 10 zombies chased behind. They didn't even dare to look back, and just concentrated on running with all their might. Unfortunately for them, just as they turned the corner, another group of 5 zombies suddenly appeared and started staggering towards them. One of the students panicked and his movements froze, being scratched hard by one of the zombies. The pain seemed to wake him up as he quickly turned to flee, as did his companions, only to see that they were surrounded. 5 zombies ahead and 10 blocking the retreat. Just as they were wailing and crying, there were several sword flashes, and in just over 10 seconds, all 10 zombies were decapitated. Strong! Zhang Ming, a tall student, couldn't help but exclaim as he saw Bai Zemin charging toward the front 5 zombies and killing them as if he was slaughtering chickens. There was a student this strong in our university? Look at all the people he saved. Another student muttered in stupefaction as he watched the 15 people Bai Zemin brought in. Although Bai Zemin knew nothing about the way of the sword and simply cut using pure strength, his current agility was 17 points, almost double that of a normal person before the apocalypse. In addition, his Xianyuan sword was incredibly sharp, which allowed him to decapitate zombies as if it were nothing. After making quick work of beheading the 15 zombies, Bai Zemin felt a little tired. He had killed about 60 zombies since the moment he left the male dormitory, and added to that he had also killed about 10 giant insects and 3 mutated dogs. All those kills had only allowed him to level up once, currently being level 9. But even if he was much stronger than before, his stamina was slowly depleting, and if he wasn't careful he might die if he was surrounded. The 3 mutant dogs gave him a total of 9 points of agility and 8 points of stamina, making him more powerful. Bai Zemin walked towards a group of students, and even before they could say thank you, he pointed at the student who had been scratched earlier and said in a firm voice, "You can't stay. You must leave." Upon hearing his words, the group of 5 friends had a drastic change in their expressions. However, the 15 people who were saved by Bai Zemin said nothing and simply stood behind him, looking at the surroundings in fear. "What? Why do I have to leave?" The pointed student shouted indignantly. "You were scratched by that zombie. I saw it before." Bai Zemin said coldly. "You must know what will happen to, don't you?" The student's face turned pale. However, he was not willing to die, so he denied the reality by saying, "What do you know? What do you know if those damn creatures are zombies or not?" The students looked at him with sympathy. Bai Zemin looked at him coldly and said nothing more, but turned around and started walking towards the gymnasium with firm steps. The students quickly followed him, including the student who had been scratched earlier. Bai Zemin, who had been paying attention, turned around and in a matter of seconds appeared before the student. With a heavy punch in his stomach, the student was forced to kneel on the ground as he struggled to breathe. "I told you that you can't follow me." After saying those words, he turned around and walked away. The students did not dare to say a word, not even that students for classmates. Currently, Bai Zemin's mood was terrible, and after killing over 100 zombies, the smell of blood surrounding him was thick, giving him a savage aura that no one wanted to provoke. "I like this human more and more every minute Lilith looked at his back with flashing eyes, and her lips curved into a beautiful, seductive smile capable of enchanting any man's heart. However, no one seemed to be paying attention to her. Beijing University, being one of the most prestigious universities in all of China, as well as one of the most important universities in the world that even foreign students attended, was extremely large. The campus was several acres in size, and the university was like a small city by itself. Supermarkets, karaokes, there were even some restaurants inviting students to stay on the premises without going out too much. The distance between the male dormitory and the gymnasium was only about 400 meters, but because all the roads were plagued with dangers in the form of zombies, evolved insects, and animals that seemed to have turned into beasts, crossing that distance had become a challenging feat. Bai Zemin dashed relentlessly and slashed with his sword again and again. Along the way, he had saved the lives of 5 others, increasing the number of survivors at his side to nearly 24. A man with gold-rimmed glasses and a rather handsome appearance was chatting with a female student who was looking at him with an obvious crush. This man's name was Lian Sun, and he was the vice president of the university's student association. Before the apocalypse, Lian Sun was a model student with excellent grades, and in addition to his good looks, he had many female suitors. Even now that the world had changed, there were some surviving girls who looked at him with strange glints in their eyes. Lian Sun had also dared to fight since at that time he had no other options if he wanted to survive. He was currently level 3 and could handle 2 or 3 zombies by himself. When he encountered Bai Zemin's group, he was about to be surrounded by 6 zombies, which meant death for him. After he killed 2 zombies and Bai Zemin killed the other 4, Lian Xin joined the group and helped kill straggling zombies. After all, even for someone like Bai Zemin, who had been fighting and killing creatures of a higher level than him constantly, it was not 100% safe to protect such a large group of people without 1 or 2 zombies slipping in. Swoosh! Suddenly, a green shadow appeared in the distance, charging towards the group of over 20 people at astonishing speeds. Bai Zemin had just killed a mosquito that was almost 20 centimeters long, and before he could react, That green shadow had already passed beyond his defense perimeter, appearing in front of Lian Xian. Lian Xian's face turned pale, and he took a step back. If he faced a few zombies, he was still fine, but if a big bee or a mutated dog with above-average speeds appeared, then there was no way he could even react. Because Lian Xian had only killed zombies so far, he only obtained extra attributes during the first 4 or 5 zombies and only gained stamina. Lian Xian had also used the 6 status points he had gained from leveling up in strength, so his speed was merely average. Lian Xian grabbed the girl who was chatting with him and didn't even hesitate when he threw her in front of that strange shadow, taking cover in the process. The green shadow suddenly flashed, and in the next instant, the girl's body was split in 2. Her blood splattered everywhere, and a look of shock and incredulity shone in her eyes before she died. Even in her wildest dreams, she would never have expected that the normally cultured, polite, and gentlemanly Lian Xian would actually not hesitate to make such a cruel move. The survivors panicked, and a few began to flee in all directions in a disorderly manner. Others did not move due to fear, and some smarter ones just walked away while trying to get closer to Bai Zemin, as he was the only hope they had of survival. As for Lian Xian's selfish act, no one noticed. No one except the beautiful and seductive, but at the same time innocent Lilith. Though such a move was impossible to be missed by someone like her, there was no disdain or disgust in her gaze. She had seen people do worse things than what she had just seen, just to survive one more day. The green shadow was so fast that no one could react to its speed. This strange creature suddenly seemed to realize something as it shot off at terrifying speeds toward Bai Zemin. Clearly, the creature had realized that he was the best tonic for it to evolve. Bai Zemin felt his scalp go numb and unconsciously raised his sword horizontally. Clang! The sound of metal clashing against metal echoed loudly. The green shadow was forced to stop its movements as its strength and Bai Zemin's were quite similar. Only now could Bai Zemin distinguish the appearance of the monster that was attacking him. The green shadow was actually a huge mantis that was almost 2 meters tall. Its terrifying eyes stared at him with killing intent flickering inside. Its 2 large, scythe-like forelegs were pressing hard on the Xianyuan sword, trying to force Bai Zemin back. Ono Epsilon. If it was Bai Zemin before obtaining the Xianyuan sword, he could have been seen to retreat. However, thanks to the 20 strength points the sword granted him, he could barely stand on equal footing. Be careful. That mantis doesn't specialize in strength at all. Its current speed must be almost twice as fast as yours. Lilith's voice rang in his ear, giving him vital information. In fact, even without her telling him, Bai Zemin knew that his current speed was far below this mantis. Before, if not for his reflexes and luck, his head would have already separated from his body, without even knowing how he had died. Bai Zemin grunted as he pushed forward with all his might, pushing the mantis back. Then, without even a second's hesitation, he added all his saved status points into agility. In just a split second, he felt his muscles become stronger, but at the same time softer. Bai Zemin felt as if lightning flashed in his body, giving him a slight itch that soon disappeared. Swoosh! The nearly 2-meter mantis disappeared, and in the next instant appeared before Bai Zemin again, slashing downward with its scythe-like legs. However, the current Bai Zemin could finally see its movements clearly. Clang! Bai Zemin and the mantis engaged in close combat with the intention of slaying the other. To survive, to evolve, to become stronger. From the other people's point of view, they could only see 2 silhouettes flickering constantly and hear the constant sound of metal clashing against metal. For them, it was hard to think that a human being could actually fight in such a way against such a terrifying creature without losing ground. It was only then that they realized Bai Zemin's strength. Although Bai Zemin's combat experience was average and his sword skill deficient, the Xianyuan sword was a rare grade treasure capable of piercing through the defenses of almost any creature below level 40. The mantis obviously had not yet reached that level, as its sides had small cracks that slowly spread with each collision. However, the mantis was a natural hunter who made use of its size from birth, so it was naturally more skilled than he was in combat. Each had their own advantages, and for an instant, the battle was deadlocked in what appeared to be a stalemate. Several zombies, apparently attracted by the sound of battle, as well as the strong smell of life, began to stagger over. Bai Zemin quickly spotted them and knew that at this rate, not only would all the survivors die, but even he would also fall when they surrounded him. After all, the mantis might not be afraid of infection, but he was. Strengthening his determination, Bai Zemin surveyed the battlefield and slowly backed away, luring the mantis to a specific spot. Upon reaching that spot, Bai Zemin spent 60 points of mana and created 6 bloody chains using the blood of the dead zombies. The mantis was clearly taken by surprise, and the chains wrapped tightly around its body. Its movements were stalled, and its 2 sides were stopped in midair by 2 bloody chains. The beast struggled fiercely, trying to free itself, and the chains restraining its sides began to stretch taut, as if they would break at any moment. Bai Zemin's face changed slightly when he saw this, and he quickly rushed forward and slashed towards the creature's head with all his strength. After a flash of sharp light, the mantis' movements stopped for a moment before its head fell to the ground, followed by a fountain of blood shooting out of its neck. You have obtained the soul power of Great Fast Mantis level 25. Agility plus 14, Strength plus 10, Magic plus 10, Mana plus 10. You have leveled up and reached level 10. You get 2 attribute points to distribute freely. You have leveled up and reached level 11. You have leveled up and reached level 12. You have leveled up and reached level 13. You get 2 attribute points to distribute freely. A huge orb of soul power came out of the Great Fast Mantis body and entered Bai Zemin's body, nourishing him and taking his power to higher levels. In addition, he also directly gained 4 levels as a result. Besides, the mantis had dropped other things after its death. Next to its corpse was 1 red orb, 1 orange orb, and 1 scroll. Fighting against high-level creatures was really risky. A single mistake was enough to send anyone on their way into the underworld and pay a greeting to the legendary god of death. In fact, even fighting a level 3 zombie during the first few minutes of the apocalypse was extremely difficult. One touch, the slightest scratch, and it would all be over right then and there. It didn't take a bite or too much contact for a life to end. In truth, if it weren't for Bai Zemin's luck, he would probably be dead by now. At that time, because the window of his room was small, the level 5 Bigby had no choice but to fly directly that way, which made it much simpler for Bai Zemin to attack it since he knew where the assault would come from. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to defeat such a fast and unpredictable monster. It was also thanks to that single kill that he obtained his skill blood manipulation. If it wasn't for this skill, Bai Zemin wouldn't even have been able to leave his room successfully and would have become zombie food by now. However, although fighting high-level monsters was risky, the rewards of being victorious were far superior to the rewards one would get from defeating monsters at the same level. Just the extra stat points alone were equivalent to 2 or more levels, considering the fact that each person only got 2 stat points per level. Not to mention the drops. Bai Zemin took a step forward and quickly put both orbs and the scroll into his backpack before standing up again. Immediately, and without even a moment's rest, he stomped hard on the ground beneath his feet and charged towards the zombies, staggering in his direction. A minute later, the remaining zombies had been purged by Bai Zemin. Teacher Jia, what happened to everyone else? Bai Zemin asked with a frown as he looked at a female teacher in her 30s that he had rescued earlier. Student Bai, the rest. I'm afraid they ran away when they saw things were getting ugly. As for the direction, I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't know. The teacher replied with a bitter smile. This teacher's name was Jia Jiao, and she was a teacher of the 3rd-year students, so she knew Bai Zemin. Her personality was quite kind by nature, and in the past, she had treated Bai Zemin quite well even though he came from an ordinary family. I see. Bai Zemin simply nodded as he looked at the 12 people who remained. About half of them had fled upon seeing the zombies approaching from all directions. These people would most likely die unless they dared to fight for their lives. But even then, the chances of dying were much higher than living. As for this, Bai Zemin could do nothing about it. Currently, It was already difficult for him to survive, and a single great fast mantis had forced him to use all the status points he had been saving for times of crisis. If he were to encounter two of those monsters, then Bai Zemin would most likely die unless the battlefield conditions favored him greatly. Since those people fled, then they no longer had anything to do with him. He simply saved them earlier because he was just in passing and didn't want to see his kind become food for other species. Let's go. We need to move towards the gymnasium. Only then can we get some rest, he said and turned to leave. The 12 survivors followed him, not daring to stay behind. Their eyes, filled with fear for the future, looked intently in all directions for dread that a strange mutated creature would take away the life they had been protecting for so many years. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On the opposite side of the male dormitory was the female dormitory. The distance between the place where the girls rested and the gymnasium was exactly the same as the distance between the gymnasium and the male dormitory. A group of about 20 people moved in the direction of the gymnasium. This group of people was mainly composed of women, but there were also 7 men among them. However, no matter whether it was the women or the men, they all looked at the back of the woman who was leading them with respect, admiration, or love. A group of 5 zombies stumbled toward the crowd of survivors. Seeing their distorted expressions and their blank eyes, many of them could not help but shudder along with the small sound of choked sobs. The woman leading the group and carrying the lives of nearly 20 people on her shoulders had beautiful silver-colored hair and bright blue eyes. Her skin was as white as milk and as smooth as the purest silk, giving her an appearance similar to that of a real fairy. However, her expression was as cold as eternal ice with no apparent emotional flow. Yet, although her expression was as cold as ice, her body was as hot as fire, filled with curves in the right places and extremely charming. Upon seeing the 5 zombies, this young woman of only 22 did not panic. Her gaze did not change in the slightest. She waved her hand, and 5 ice pikes appeared floating above her head. With another wave of her hand, the 5 ice pikes shot towards the incoming zombies. With great precision, the 5 ice pikes struck the heads of the 5 zombies that were moving at embarrassingly slow speeds, creating a hole the size of a small fist in the head of each target. However, no blood came out of the wounds as a small layer of ice sealed them. Alpha. When the rest of the survivors saw this, their expressions changed for the better, and their idolatry towards this woman increased several folds immediately. On the other hand, the woman's expression was still as cold and indifferent as ever. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. From a different direction, another group of survivors was advancing at a rapid pace under the leadership of 2 men. This group had about 30 people, so the strong, vital smell attracted many zombies as well as other grotesque creatures that intended to devour them in order to evolve. 2 zombies suddenly appeared from inside a building and staggered towards the survivors. However, before the survivors could even scream in terror, 2 arrows flew and struck the brains of the 2 infected, cutting them lifeless immediately. The survivors looked at the young man holding a bow, wearing sports clothes, and carrying a quiver behind his back, with admiration and envy. This young man ignored them and picked up the 2 arrows he had used before, wiping the blood on them with a rag of torn clothing. Swoosh! Suddenly, a mutated dog appeared charging at a speed 3 times faster than a normal person. The big brown dog opened its jaws wide with the intention of biting the young man's head off. With the jaw strength of this level 9 mutated dog, the young man's head would be shattered in a single bite. However, what greeted the dog was a huge hammer. Bang! The dog's head popped off in pieces. The dog's brain matter, blood, and flesh flew everywhere, making a bloody mess. The animal collapsed on the ground, completely lifeless. Even if you're fast, if you don't attack me first, you are too weak, stupid dog. A burly man with a beard on his face spat on the dog's corpse. This man looked to be about 35 years old, and the expression on his face was savage. He held a metal-colored hammer that was almost as big as a door with his 2 hands, wielding it with apparent ease, although it was clearly a heavy weapon. The group continued to advance towards the gymnasium. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Of course, Bai Zemin did not know that apart from him, there were other people who had the same idea and the same temporary goal. However, even if he did know, he probably wouldn't be too surprised. After all, the gymnasium was located right in the center of the university campus, so it was accessible from all directions. Moreover, the gymnasium was also one of the few facilities that could be considered comparatively safe. Apart from Bai Zemin, there were other people who also dared to fight or simply had no choice but to fight if they wanted to survive. As a consequence, there were several people who had their own fortuitous experiences, gaining powerful skills and treasures that did not belong to this world. 20 minutes later, and after making several detours to the area in order to find the easiest and least difficult path for the survivors he had saved, Bai Zemin was finally only 50 meters away from the gym and reached his first goal. However, things seemed to be a bit complicated. "Student Bai, now what do we do?" Jia Jiao asked with a pale face as she watched the scene in front of her. Bai Zemin frowned slightly as he crouched in a corner and saw the dense group of zombies wandering near the gymnasium. There were over 50 zombies, all of them too close together for him to pass. Even for someone like Bai Zemin, it was no easy feat to fight against 50 creatures that could defeat him with just a scratch. If it was in a place where he could move, then Bai Zemin was confident that he could take out a few hundred zombies given enough time. However, fighting 50 of these creatures in such a constricted place was challenging even for him who had been steadily leveling up. What stupefied him most was that these zombies didn't seem to have any. As Bai Zemin watched the movement of the group of zombies several meters ahead, he quickly noticed that some of them were banging on the doors in an attempt to break them down. However, these doors were completely metal, so it was absolutely impossible for these zombies to break through no matter how hard they tried. The sound of bangs from the metal door had attracted other zombies, causing that the group of a few more than 50 soon reached 80. This, coupled with the sinister atmosphere of the surroundings, caused that the disordered emotions of the students and teachers that Bai Zemin had saved to become even worse. Could it be that there are people in there? Such a thought flashed in Bai Zemin's mind, and the more he thought about it, the firmer that idea became. In order to survive another day, Bai Zemin had not only been casually swinging his sword back and forth decapitating enemies, he had also been paying attention to the behavior of the creatures as much as possible. Since zombies were the largest quantity temporarily, they were the type of enemy he knew the most about. From what he had observed so far of the zombies, these slow but fatal creatures could sense the presence of any kind of life as well as notice the smell of blood from about 20 meters or so of distance, and even if that wasn't exactly the limit, it was certainly accurate enough. There are definitely people in there, Bai Zemin finally concluded. If not for that reason, then he couldn't think of anything else why the zombies would be so intent on not moving anywhere else. He looked back and saw the people he saved looking at him, which gave him a headache. If it wasn't for these people being here, Bai Zemin would have already taken out the treasures he obtained after defeating the great fast mantis, and among those treasures, maybe there was something that could help him get out of the difficult situation he was in. However, he did not trust these people enough to bring out such treasures in front of them. It was precisely because he did not want to reveal his strength completely that he merely used his blood manipulation for a moment in order to defeat the mantis before stopping as quickly as possible. As if she knew his thoughts, Lilith, who was standing next to him, smiled and said casually, "How about you just abandon them? Everything will be much easier for you if you leave behind these burdens that could stab you in the back at any moment." Bai Zemin looked at her with a frown without saying anything. "Don't look at me like that, just saying." Lilith shrugged her shoulders and didn't say anything else. She knew it was impossible for Bai Zemin to do something like that. After all, it had only been about an hour since he had been forced to fight for his life wielding a sword. There was no way he could change that much without experiencing the cruelty of the world. However, Lilith was sure that he would adapt soon. Otherwise, then he would just die unless he had the strength to back up such a mentality. Just when Bai Zemin did not know what to do, the group of now more than 80 zombies suddenly became hectic. One arrow flew from a distance, accurately striking a zombie's forehead. Before the zombies could react, another arrow shot out from the same direction and another zombie collapsed. Strong. Bai Zemin was a little surprised. He didn't know who the attacker was since there were several buildings blocking his view. However, that person's archery skill was really top-notch. Unfortunately, after 5 arrows, the assault was temporarily stopped. Apparently, the attacker was quite close, and the zombies were surrounding that person. "All of you wait here." Leaving those words behind, Bai Zemin jumped out from his hiding place like a tiger and charged towards the zombies. In a matter of seconds, the distance of 50 meters separating him and the zombies had been crossed. Bai Zemin slashed with his sword twice at lightning speed, and the heads of 2 zombies flew into the air. You have acquired level 4 normal zombie soul power. You have acquired level 4 normal zombie soul power. Within 5 seconds, 7 zombies had been decapitated by Bai Zemin. Liang Peng, who carried a huge 2-meter hammer, swung it at a zombie, sending it flying 10 meters. The zombie fell to the ground with the upper half of its body deformed and its head completely crushed. However, he soon noticed a man several years younger than him, slaughtering zombies like ants, and his eyes widened. F*CK D*M. What's wrong with that insane speed? Liang Peng cursed. Bai Zemin's current agility had already reached 54 points. This meant that he was more than 5 times faster than the average person before the apocalypse. His movements were extremely fast, so when Bai Zemin had killed 5 or 6 zombies, Liang Peng had only killed one that was close to him. RB. On the other hand, Bai Zemin also noticed Liang Peng with his huge hammer and was surprised. Wasn't that the university security guard? At what point had he become so strong as to carry that hammer? However, just as his mind was beginning to wonder, another change swept the battlefield. Ice bullets. A cold but pleasant-sounding voice echoed. Immediately afterward, 10 tiny spheres of ice floated into the air and shot out towards 10 different zombies, hitting them in the head with accuracy and taking their lives. Oh, that woman's control over mana is greater than yours. As if that wasn't enough, her current magic power is only slightly less than what you had when the soul records reached this lower world. How strange. Lilith's surprised and somewhat confused voice sounded next to Bai Zemin. Since the time he had saved other people, and these people didn't even look at Lilith, Bai Zemin had come to the silent conclusion that she was invisible to others and only he could see her. Therefore, he wasn't too surprised to see her casually strutting around the place. Bai Zemin looked at the woman who had joined at the fray, and his eyes could not help but light up. What a beautiful woman! Her silver hair and blue eyes had made her look like a snow lotus, but at the same time, she was like an ice fairy. However, although he appreciated her beauty, that was all. After all, Bai Zemin had already seen the incredibly beautiful, seductive, and innocent Lilith. Bai Zemin's movements did not flinch in the slightest as he continued to decapitate zombies, and for every second that passed 1 or 2 fell at his feet. As if the arrival of the silver-haired woman marked a new beginning, the arrows resumed their slaughter. However, for some reason, the shooter's speed increased without losing accuracy in the slightest. The group of more than 80 zombies was terrifying. Anyone would be overwhelmed by them, and even an evolver would die if surrounded. The danger from these creatures was further heightened as the gymnasium was enclosed by buildings, making it a bad place to launch an attack, but a good place to defend. In this case, since the humans were the attackers, they had no choice but to suffer. However, no matter whether it was Bai Zemin, the silver-haired woman, Liang Peng, or the archer hidden among the buildings, they all had their own qualities of which they could be proud and could be considered the cream of the crop among the students and professors of the university. Thus, less than 2 minutes later, all the zombies, including the most separated of the group, had been annihilated. Blood had formed several puddles and flesh was scattered randomly all over the place. The smell was extremely repulsive and the sight could scare anyone. However, the people who fought this time had to fight against death and crawl from dozens or even hundreds of corpses to make their way here. Therefore, none of them had too much of an overreaction. The 3 fighters in sight looked at each other with a hint of caution in their eyes. Now that the world had changed, it was hard to tell if people's hearts had not. In consequence, None of the three trusted each other too much. The silver-haired woman with the ability to control ice looked at them coldly. In her gaze, there was even a hint of disgust that was hard to notice. The atmosphere had become somewhat strange. Neither of them seemed willing to speak. At that moment, the sound of hurried footsteps coming from the distance caused Bai Zemin's gaze to turn in that direction. A handsome young man of 22 or 23 in blue sportswear, with a bow in his left hand and a half-empty quiver on his back, hurried over. So that guy is the archer from before. Bai Zemin thought silently. When the young archer saw the silver-haired woman, his eyes lit up, and as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, he smiled. Bing Shui, I'm glad you're okay. Bing Shui? Bai Zemin blinked before he finally realized the reason why this woman looked familiar. Shangguan Bing Shui, a fourth-year student and current student association president. She was not only the most beautiful woman on campus, but also the #1 person in grades. Bai Zemin knew a little about her because he had met her a couple of times when she, as student president, organized student assemblies to report important information and events. However, since she was not important to him, he had simply forgotten about her existence. I'm glad you're okay too, Chunhee. Shangguan Bing Shui's cold and indifferent gaze did not change very much when she saw the young man. However, Bai Zemin noticed that the strange glint of hatred or repulsion had dimmed greatly when she looked at him. Anyway, since the zombie problem was fixed, Bai Zemin did not stay to listen to this group's conversation and turned around, walking away quietly. Wait a moment, little brother. Liang Peng quickly shouted when he saw him walking away. His words had attracted the attention of the other pair. Bai Zemin stopped and turned around to look at him silently, waiting for his next words. How about you stay here with us? Liang Peng offered. With the strength of the four of us together, we can easily wipe out those creatures and live a better life. Bai Zemin had a strange glint in his eyes. He simply turned around and, as he walked away, said casually, I'm simply going to look for a dozen students and teachers whom I saved earlier. I didn't go out of my way to clean up this place, to casually leave. Liang Peng was puzzled. On the other hand, Shangguan Bing Shui looked at him coldly before turning around and walking away as well. The young archer, Chunhee, quickly followed her as they chatted with each other. 10 minutes later, the group of survivors rescued by Bai Zemin, Liang Peng, Shangguan Bing Shui, and Chunhee joined together to form a large group of about 70 people. Because the storm was still raging with no apparent intention of stopping soon, the blood and metallic smell it gave off were washed away by the rain in a few minutes. This could prevent other creatures from approaching this place in search of food. However, it also had its disadvantages. One of these disadvantages was that everyone's clothes were completely wet. Unfortunately, they could only hold on like this for now. After arguing for 5 minutes, the people hiding inside the gymnasium were forced to open the doors regardless of their fear. Although none of them were willing to open the doors and risk letting danger in, after Liang Peng threatened that if they did not open the doors he would break it down by force, they had no choice but to give in. Bai Zemin was surprised to discover a total of approximately 30 people hiding inside the gymnasium. Among these 30 people, there were men, women, and some teachers. They all looked at them with apprehension and suspicion. As for this, Bai Zemin ignored it. He separated from everyone and walked around the premises, making sure that there was no hidden danger of any kind. The Beijing University Gymnasium was really huge, and although it was called a gymnasium, it was a huge building with all kinds of functions. There was a large indoor basketball court, a sports equipment room, and a cafeteria. The cafeteria was Bai Zemin's target on this occasion. Bang! Bang! The metal door was closed tightly. Bai Zemin, who had moved away from the group, could hear the sound of banging coming from inside. He could not help but frown slightly as he thought. Since the cafeteria had glass windows, some insects probably managed to get in. As for bigger creatures, that was impossible since there were metal bars on the windows. Unless a monster with a lot of strength or sharp weapons like the Great Fast Mantis appeared, there was no way they could get in. Ringo B. Epsilon. Therefore, that sound could only be from zombies. Bai Zemin looked to the left and right to make sure no one else was there. After making sure, He opened his backpack and took out the 2 orbs he had obtained earlier, as well as the scroll. How does this color thing work? Bai Zemin thought aloud, forgetting that there was another existence there who could hear him. It's the colors of the rainbow, Lilith pointed out with a beautiful smile. Seeing Bai Zemin's questioning look, she explained, from lower rank to higher rank, treasures are divided as follows. Red orb is equivalent to a normal grade treasure. An orange orb equals a rare grade treasure. A yellow orb is equivalent to a magic grade treasure. Green orbs are equivalent to epic grade treasures. Cyan color means legend grade treasure. Indigo-colored orbs are equivalent to semi-god grade treasures. Finally, violet-colored orbs mean god grade treasures. The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth constricted several times, and he couldn't help but complain, "You should have stopped your explanation on magic grade or epic grade treasures. Now that I look at this red orb, suddenly I don't think it's worth much. I think you're misunderstanding something." Lilith smiled and reminded him of something important. Even a red grade treasure is more valuable than a high-tech machine gun. Let me explain something to you. When you defeat a creature, you absorb its soul power. When that creature's soul power is much higher than yours, the soul record concentrates all the power you were unable to absorb in the form of treasures. The higher the level of your enemy, the higher the chances of getting a higher quality treasure, and the higher the remaining soul power, the higher the probabilities go up even more. Therefore, even the red-colored orb in your hands is more valuable than you think at the current stages. Lilith concluded. Hearing her words, Bai Zemin couldn't help but feel better. Although he felt like asking more questions, he first wanted to finish what he was about to do. The questions could be asked later. After squeezing the red orb hard, it broke and a new treasure appeared in front of Bai Zemin. Velocity boots, normal grade treasure, extremely light, easy to wear, and automatically adapts to the body. When equipped, agility +10. Bai Zemin's eyes lit up and his heart filled with joy. It was just a normal treasure, but these boots increased his agility by +10 points. This was equivalent to 1/5 of Bai Zemin's total agility. He quickly equipped the boots and immediately felt his body become much lighter than before. Now, with his 64 agility points, Bai Zemin was more than 6 times faster than a normal person before the arrival of the soul record on planet Earth. Repressing his latent excitement, he did the same with the orange orb. Full coat, rare treasure, a jacket that covers from the upper body to the knees. It can stop anything from light shotgun shells to 9mm caliber bullets. When equipped, all attributes +5. Bai Zemin held the jacket in his hands and almost wanted to roar at the sky to say thank you. With this treasure, he was now impervious to several types of firearms, even if medium caliber bullets were too strong. With this treasure, his survivability had skyrocketed another level. He didn't even have to fear being scratched by zombies. As long as he protected his head and, from the knees down, there should be no problem with his safety. Without delay, Bai Zemin took off the wet jacket he was wearing and put on the full coat. He immediately felt his attributes improving once again, much to his delight. That treasure is good. Among the best quality within the rare grade, just like your Xian Yuan sword. Congratulations! Lilith smiled cheerfully at him. Bai Zemin was surprised when he realized that she actually looked genuinely happy for him, puzzling him. Lilith, why are you nice to me? He asked, feeling a little suspicious. Lilith bit her lips and blinked her long eyelashes as she said in a soft voice, I already told you. I want you to be mine. Bai Zemin rolled his eyes and wisely decided to stop asking. Although his appearance wasn't bad, he wasn't a handsome guy either. Much less so handsome that the biggest beauty he had ever seen in his entire life would fall in love with him at first sight. Without delay, and fearing that someone else was coming to this place, Bai Zemin turned his attention to the remaining scroll. Special Forces Soldier, unranked passive skill, level 5. By learning this passive skill, you will automatically become a person with the same level of combat experience as Special Forces troops. At the same time, your control and knowledge of your world's firearms grow exponentially. Special Forces Soldier. Bai Zemin's eyes lit up when he saw the name of the skill. After seeing the vague but concise information available on the skill scroll, his gaze became even brighter. Currently, Bai Zemin was countless times more powerful than any human being before the world changed. His strength had reached 55 points thanks to the Xianyuan sword and the full coat that he had just obtained. His agility had reached 69 points, and the rest of his stats were also at least twice that of an ordinary person. However, although he could currently dominate his enemies by overwhelming them due to his stats, treasures acquired, and his blood manipulation skill, Bai Zemin was very clear that if he faced an enemy on equal terms with him, but with real combat experience, the one who would be unlucky and meet a fatal fate would probably be him. What Bai Zemin lacked the most at this moment was combat experience, control of different martial arts, etc. But with the skill scroll in his hands, this problem could be solved immediately. He only needed to wish for it, and he would immediately become an experienced person as an elite soldier with years of training and battle experience. However, Bai Zemin hesitated. Unclassified skill? He muttered under his breath. Although he didn't know how the level of skills and their rankings worked, Bai Zemin, who obtained a skill ranked as first-order skill, couldn't help but feel that this skilled Special Forces soldier wasn't that good in the long run. Before he could think any further, the beautiful and charming Lilith interrupted him with a sweet smile. You don't need to worry. Although in fact, in the long run, that skill might not be so good, it's a passive skill. Listening to her, Bai Zemin's eyes shone brightly as he realized that the word passive was the key in this matter. Even after facing so many dangers, Bai Zemin had not forgotten about the warning he received when he decided to learn his blood manipulation skill. That warning was reminding him that he could only learn 4 more external skills. External active skills are those skills that need mana movement to function and that you didn't learn on your own throughout your life. Lilith explained patiently. Before, you were just a normal human with no training, and yet, nevertheless, you were able to learn a terrifying skill in just a few seconds. Bai Zemin did not dare to miss any words and focused all his attention on her. Lilith continued. Although it might be fine now, if you learn too many external active skills, in the long run your brain will be overloaded by all the accumulated information and your body cannot support such a stress. That's precisely why you can only learn 5 active ones at first. I'll explain more about this when we have time, as I prefer not to rush things. However, you don't need to worry at all. The passive skills you can learn through skill scrolls are endless. That was all he needed to hear. Bai Zemin looked at Lilith with a rare smile and slowly said, You really are my lucky demon, Lilith. Without waiting for a reply and without seeing her reaction, he closed his eyes and wished to learn the contents of the scroll in his hands. The scroll in his hands turned into countless particles of light that flowed into his body. In the depths of his soul, a bronze-colored rune appeared with countless engravings on it. Bai Zemin immediately felt a slight prickling in his mind that instead of being painful, was uncomfortable. Martial arts of self-defense, fighting skills to kill the opponent in the shortest amount of time possible, depending on the circumstances, control over bladed weapons, knowledge about firearms, as well as the correct way such weapons worked and the optimal way to use them. So much information flooded Bai Zemin's brain. It was so much information that for several seconds his mind went blank, not knowing how to react. He looked at his hands in disbelief and couldn't help but mutter. That's how strong the elite soldiers were before the world changed. At this moment, only he himself knew how horrible his strength had become. His stats had not changed at all, but Bai Zemin was confident that if he met the great fast Mantis again, he could finish it off in less than 3 seconds, even without using his blood manipulation skill. In fact, Bai Zemin did not know that even his gaze had changed. His eyes had become sharper and more piercing, like a sheathed blade waiting for the moment to show its lethality to the world. Well, you gained the combat experience of the best elite soldiers in the history of your world, so it's understandable that your strength took a big step forward. Lilith smiled. Her voice was extremely pleasant to listen to. Although you were strong by human standards before, your combat experience was simply too lacking. Now, you can barely consider yourself a novice. Bai Zemin looked at her doubtfully. A novice? He didn't think so. Lilith looked at him with a smile that didn't seem very friendly and said slowly, "In your world, you could consider yourself an elite among humans, but that is limited to your world. There are countless other worlds with countless other fighters and different cultures. In my eyes, you are similar to a baby just learning to walk, with a cute beta epsilon." In the end, Bai Zemin raised both hands in surrender, and his emotion cooled. Although being proud and arrogant was good, Lilith was right. Currently, he had merely just begun to take his first steps. Too much arrogance or confidence could end up killing him, and he definitely had no intention of dying. Lilith also noticed that Bai Zemin had put his feet back on the earth and could not help but smile. If he became too proud just because of something so small, it would be too disappointing for her. Fortunately, it didn't turn out to be like that. Bai Zemin looked at the metal door in front of him. He could still hear the frenzied banging of the creatures inside, trying to forcefully break down the door. If the floor gets too stained, it will be a headache to clean it up later, Bai Zemin said casually and opened the door without even hesitation. Immediately, like wild beasts released from their confinement, zombies staggered out from inside the cafeteria, their hands trying to capture their target as quickly as possible, and their blood-stained faces gave them an extremely horrible appearance. Bai Zemin did not even unsheath his sword. He took a big step forward and raised his right foot, directly striking the first zombie in the throat. The sound of bones breaking into countless pieces was extremely scary, and anyone who heard it would undoubtedly be shocked beyond what any words could describe. The struck zombie flew several meters away, hitting the zombies behind it in the process. When it hit the floor, it was no longer moving. The zombie was still alive since the brain was intact. However, Bai Zemin's kick had destroyed the jaw and crushed the upper bones of the spine. Therefore, although its brain still functioned, it could no longer use its mouth to bite, nor could it move its hands or feet. The zombie was no different from any other zombie killed by Bai Zemin before. No, if there was a difference, there was no blood flowing like water from a fountain. In total, there were more than 15 zombies inside the cafeteria. With almost 70 agility points, Bai Zemin's body was constantly flashing, appearing and disappearing amidst the group of zombies. The sound of bones breaking into pieces along with the sound of the zombies' bodies falling to the ground after being hit was extremely clear in the place. Sometimes he used his fists, sometimes he used his palm or the side of his hands, his feet, his knees, and sometimes he used his elbows. Bai Zemin's entire body had become an extremely robust, sharp, and formidable weapon capable of claiming the life of any enemy. Less than 10 seconds later, all 15 zombies lay on the ground, alive, but no different from those who were actually dead. Some had all 4 limbs broken. Others had their jaws snapped and their spines separated into countless pieces, and the heads of others had been turned at an impossible angle, disconnecting the brain from the rest of the body. Bai Zemin's expression stayed impassive at the horrifying sight. With his blood manipulation skill coupled with the experience of humanity's strongest elites, his heart could no longer be shaken by such a thing. However, the sound of bones breaking, the sound of bodies hitting the walls and tables, naturally attracted the attention of other people. Shangwan Bingshui, Chun He, and Liang Peng appeared outside the cafeteria. They had obviously come to see what was going on after hearing the commotion. Chun He, who was holding his bow and an arrow ready to be shot at any moment, could not help but suck in a breath of fresh air when he saw the miserable condition of the corpses on the ground. Even the usually wild and strong Liang Peng had a distinct change of expression. He looked at Bai Zemin standing amidst the corpses and could not help but mutter, "Is he still human or not?" On the other hand, Shangwan Bingshui's beautiful but cold face had slight frown. Her cold gaze switched back and forth between Bai Zemin and the zombies on the ground. She had noticed that, apart from the miserable condition their bodies were in, there were no bleeding wounds there. Even the creatures' heads were practically intact. The basketball court was quite large and the stands had enough seats to fit a few thousand people without any problem. Currently, sitting in different seats, students and teachers looked in the direction of the cafeteria with fearful eyes. "Big sister, sure. Do you think something bad happened?" A small-built female student asked in a low voice as she hugged her knees and cuddled tightly in an effort to give herself warmth. Xiaolan, don't worry. You also saw how strong Big Sister Bing Shui is. Even if some zombies appear, they won't be a problem against her. Wu Shi said in a firm tone, try to sound as confident as possible, not only to convince her friend, but also to convince herself. Zi Xiaolan bit her lips tightly as her body trembled constantly. In the end, she could not hold back her tears and began to sob. Big Sister Shi, I am so scared. Song Qing turned into a zombie suddenly, and Zheng Na was bitten death. Many people died, and I won't be able to talk with them anymore. Wu Shi, who was barely containing her own emotions, finally couldn't help but start to cry. She had just tried to communicate with her family. Unfortunately, she got no response. She already feared the worst. I'm cold. I want to wear dry clothes. I want to feel warm. I want to hear my mother's sermons again. Wu Shi whispered in tears. This kind of conversation could be heard everywhere inside the gymnasium. The students were terrified, waiting for a dark and unknown future. A few hours ago, they were all laughing and chatting happily, worrying about what kind of clothes they should buy to look their best. However, now all they wished for was dry clothes to relieve the bone-chilling cold. Even the teachers, who were the responsible adults, were in no position to relieve others when they themselves did not know if the next moment a strange creature would walk through the doors and claim their lives. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What happened here? Shangguan Bing Shui's cold voice was the first sound to break the silence of the place. Bai Zemin did not answer immediately. Instead, he gathered several tablecloths on the floor and tied it end to end, thus forming a huge square of cloth. Then, he began to carefully move the body of the immobile zombies on top of the cloth square, while slowly explaining. There is enough food in this cafeteria to sustain about 100 people for approximately a week. Besides, I don't feel comfortable in crowds either, so I'm planning to make this place my temporary resting area. So I'll take care of these zombies. You took care of these zombies, you say? Shangguan Bing Shui muttered in a strange voice as she watched Bai Zemin work. Except for the initial glance, he had not looked back at them again and simply continued to work tirelessly. Many thoughts were constantly flashing in Shangguan Bing Shui's mind, making it extremely difficult to comprehend her. Chen he was not thinking as many things as she was. He simply looked at Bai Zemin's back and asked, May I ask how? Right? We still don't know your name. You are? Bai Zemin. He casually replied. Bai Zemin wasn't trying to act cool. This was his real personality. Even before the world became chaotic, he was not good at dealing with many people due to certain past incidents. I see, Bai Zemin. It's a pleasure to meet you. Chun he said politely with a smile. Chun he was extremely handsome. His archery skill allowed him to become the best in his club, and his grades were in the top 10 every semester. All these excellent qualities together with his unknown but powerful family made him the Prince Charming of countless beautiful girls. Even among the boys, he was popular because of his kindness. Same here, Bai Zemin replied without much interest. His top priority now was to fully ensure his safety, then make a call home to check on his family's safety, and finally understand the rules of the new world better. Therefore, he was not interested in making friends with anyone, just as he had not been in the past. Chunni's expression became a little uncomfortable at Bai Zemin's clear coldness, and a bitter smile appeared on his handsome face. How did you deal with them? Shangguan Bing Shui asked. She could see some blood stains on the ground. However, that blood was obviously from the 4 large mosquitoes that were dead and torn to pieces on the ground. Then, Shangguan Bing Shui was curious to know how it was possible that the young man in front of her killed the zombies without injuring them. They're not dead. They're still alive, Bai Zemin replied, finally finishing dragging the 15 bodies. What? Shangguan Bing Shui's cold and indifferent expression broke for a moment when she heard his words. Bai Zemin began to drag the large square of cloth towards the exit with a bit of difficulty, but with steady steps. Although his strength was 55 points in total, he had not yet reached a level where he could drag 15 adult people casually. No. As he walked, he replied, These zombies are still alive. It's just that I destroyed all the connecting bones of the body, so even if the brain is intact, They're no different from dead zombies since they can't do anything. I didn't want to stay in the ground where I will sleep with blood. Shangwan Bing Shui's eyes lit up, and she finally understood the reason why the zombies' bodies were in such a terrible condition. Previously, she had assumed that Bai Zemin was simply a barbaric and violent person, but after listening to his explanation, she understood that she had been wrong. Although she somewhat admired his strength, that was all. From her point of view, there was no trustworthy person in this place. To Shangwan Bing Shui, the only person she could trust a bit was her childhood friend Chunhee. As for the rest, they were all useless. Especially the men. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Currently, Shangwan Bing Shui was surrounded by both men and women. Lian Xian, the vice president of the student association, and Chunhee, the skilled archer, were constantly trying to engage her in conversation. Liang Peng, the strong man with a terrifying hammer, looked at the bodies of some female students and teachers casually without caring too much about the world outside. After carrying the 15 zombies out of the place and dragging them to a nearby building, Bai Zemin returned to the gymnasium. He simply ignored the stares he was receiving and walked away quietly with no intention of chatting with anyone. Upon arriving at the cafeteria, Bai Zemin used his blood manipulation skill to remove the blood that stained the floor, sending it through the broken window to the outside. Because the glass was broken, rainwater was constantly pouring in and the areas near the windows were soaked. In addition, the cold was really unbearable. After a few minutes of consideration, Bai Zemin ripped the legs off several tables and used the tops to cover the windows one by one. To prevent the wood from falling off, he used several cabinets and refrigerators inside the room, thus sealing out rain, wind, and decreasing the chances of an insect getting in. Then, Bai Zemin closed the door and locked himself inside the cafeteria. He turned on a dim light and sat on a chair away from the window and door to rest. 5 minutes later, he took his cell phone out of his backpack and, with trembling hands, called his mother. The number you wish to reach is out of service or out of battery. Please try again later. Bai Zemin took a deep breath to calm himself, not wanting to think about the worst-case scenario. With lingering fear, he dialed Meng Qi's number. The number you wish to reach is out of service or out of battery. Please try again later. Receiving the same message again, Bai Zemin couldn't help but put down the cell phone and leave it on the table. He slumped gently onto the chair and, as he listened to the steady sound of lightning, his eyes flooded slightly with tears. Although he did not want to think about it, it was clear to Bai Zemin that the probability that his family had died was very high indeed. After all, many people had turned into zombies without warning, zombies had started attacking ruthlessly, insects had evolved, and even domestic animals had turned wild. However, he really wasn't willing. The only real thing he had was his family after all. Barely resisting the urge to cry, Bai Zemin picked up his cell phone again and dialed his father's number. Sitting in a nearby chair, Lilith felt a bit sad for him as she watched him act like a small child about to cry. Even when he was forced to fight for his life, even when he had no choice but to raise a sword and bathe in blood, even when his entire life was collapsing in front of him, Bai Zemin was always decisive and did not hesitate. He fought when it was necessary to fight and used his brain to perfection to survive. However, in the face of his family's possible death, his calm had flown out the window. The reason why Lilith felt a little sad about Bai Zemin's situation was because she had decided to trust and believe in him since she currently had her own problems. However, it could not be said that Lilith felt pain for seeing him like this. They had only known each other for about 2 or 3 hours, and the amount of interaction they had with each other was not much either. Besides, Lilith had seen many things worse than the loss of a family during her lifetime. To her, even the fall of an entire race where tears of blood were shed was not such a strange sight either. Now, she could only hope that his family was safe and had not experienced any accidents. Otherwise, if he fell and did not get up again, his death was a matter of time. This was something Lilith hoped would not happen. Unfortunately, people's fate sometimes turn out to be extremely cruel. The number you wish to reach is out of service or out of battery. Please try again, dash. Bang! Bai Zemin didn't even wait for the message to end when he smashed the cell phone against the wall in front of him, completely destroying it with no way of salvation. Without even waiting for all the parts of his phone to fall to the ground, Bai Zemin grabbed the chair he was sitting on and slammed it with all his might against the floor. The wood broke into countless pieces and splinters flew everywhere. As if he had gone mad, Bai Zemin grabbed everything near him and destroyed it without caring about the quantity of noise he was making or if his attitude could scare the people outside the cafeteria. Now that he could not contact any of his 3 family members, he had assumed the worst. How could he care about other people's fear at this point? After destroying more than 20 chairs and several tables, Bai Zemin's stamina began to drop rapidly due to the misuse of his strength, exhausting him faster than usual. He slumped on the floor, leaning his back against the wall, and covered his face with one hand. Lilith looked at him silently and waited for him to vent all the frustration, sadness, anger, and pain he felt. The cafeteria fell silent, and the only sound that could be heard was the sound of thunder coming from outside. The faint, distant light that acted as illumination could barely provide a scarce source of heat, practically non-existent in the midst of such a gloomy environment. Bai Zemin did not cry. After venting in an illogical but realistic manner, he simply became silent and motionless. He had once been betrayed by people he trusted from the bottom of his heart in the past. At that time, he had felt as if his world had collapsed before his eyes, and he no longer felt like doing anything. Even leaving his room was a challenge every day. In the midst of all that sadness, pain, and desolation, his family was there for him, just as they had always been, but he hadn't noticed. From that moment on, Bai Zemin had changed drastically. He stopped going out with friends, didn't spend time worrying about having a relationship with a woman, and devoted all his time to studying and working hard to give his family a better life. However, in about 3 hours, everything he had been fighting for many years was gone. His family, the only source of warmth that made him feel comfortable, had probably died. Every time he imagined his father, his mother, or his adopted younger sister crying and asking for help before they died, his blood boiled furiously as if a volcano was about to burst. 20 minutes later, Lilith finally spoke. "Bai Zemin, your family is probably still alive." His body shuddered softly, but he did not respond. He stayed silent, longing to hear her next words. Although Bai Zemin did not know how strong Lilith was, even after becoming much more powerful than he was in the past, he felt that a snap of her fingers was more than enough to erase his existence if she really wanted it. Therefore, her words at this moment were very important to him. When the soul record arrives in a new world, the mana that was always in that world but was inactive finally begins to move. Now, imagine you spend 20 years in bed and suddenly you abruptly get up and start running at full speed. What do you think will happen? Bai Zemin raised his head softly and looked at her. In a slightly hoarse voice, he replied, "Everything would collapse. The muscles can't support the weight of the body, the ligaments can't withstand the pressure, and the heart can't pump enough blood after beating so smoothly for so long." With Tilda, right? It would all come crashing down. Lilith nodded softly and continued, "That is precisely what is happening now. After countless years of silence and tranquility, the mana of this world finally began to move everywhere, causing the world order to fall into a mess." As Lilith explained, Bai Zemin struggled to stand up and look for a healthy chair to sit on. He kept his senses focused on her, not daring to miss a single word. Humans have a weak body by nature, so most of them fail to withstand the shock of the mana wave, turning into those mutated creatures, stronger and with unlimited stamina fueled by the world's mana, but without any intelligence. On the other hand, animals possessing a more resilient body and plants with superior life expectancy are much more likely to adapt to the mana, evolving and growing to become terrifying creatures. Bai Zemin finally understood many things after listening to Lilith's explanation. From the initial function of this strange entity called soul record to the reason why so many humans turned into zombies and why previously harmless insects and animals had suddenly changed so much. At this moment, however, he couldn't care less about all of that. "So, what about my family?" he asked in an apathetic voice. Although Bai Zemin's voice was practically impassive, Lilith, who had seen countless lives throughout her wandering, could notice the waver in his gaze when he asked that question. Obviously, although he was trying to act calm, his heart was in chaos as he tried to cling to any hope. In addition to living beings, there is also the possibility that electronic objects will suffer from the mana wave. Then, it's not impossible that the communication devices would be damaged or the distance reached by the signal would have been infinitely shortened. Lilith pointed out. Bai Zemin's eyes glinted as he listened to her explanation. Indeed, Lilith's words made quite a bit of sense if one carefully observed the illogical world outside the window. Seeing the change in his expression and his eyes regaining their color, Lilith quickly added, "Besides, don't forget that during the chaos your family might have also lost their cell phones or simply didn't have time to pick it up." Bai Zemin finally couldn't help but stand up. His previously dull gaze had flared up once again, burning with hope. Previously, he had been too overwhelmed with emotions, unable to think of even something as small as what Lilith had just mentioned. In fact, it was very plausible that his family simply hadn't had time to pick up their cell phones, or they simply broke during their escape. Even if it was all a fleeting hope, Bai Zemin was not willing to let it slip away. He advanced with a big step to the chair where Lilith was sitting and hugged her gently as he said softly, "Thank you." Unconsciously, he couldn't help but be amazed at the exquisite scent of roses that Lilith's body exuded. Her soft dark hair lightly caressed his face as if it were his lover's caress. After experiencing hell and then being ascended back to the heavens, even his first-order blood manipulation could do nothing to calm his heart. With unstable emotions, he simply wasn't thinking with complete rationality. Lilith knew this perfectly well, so she didn't bother to push him away. To her, Bai Zemin was a little boy. On the contrary, she joked, "If you really want to thank me, how about taking me right here?" As if he had received an electroshock, Bai Zemin quickly backed away from her and looked at her suspiciously as he said, "You can forget about it." In fact, if it wasn't for the heat of the moment and the emotions clouding his judgment, Bai Zemin would definitely not dare to approach Lilith. Her whole being was too charming, and every action of hers was brimming with seductiveness. Even he, who was usually quite calm, didn't have the slightest confidence in resisting if she really wanted to. "Oh, come on, don't be a spoilsport." Lilith pouted, extremely cute, which was a great counter to her seductive body. "With this cold weather, I'm sure if we hug each other affectionately, our bodies will be happy." Bai Zemin rolled his eyes and was hearing the sound coming from outside. Bai Zemin and Lilith stood in silence for a moment before he walked to the door and opened it without saying a word. Standing on the other side was a female student who, though not a great beauty, was considered quite pretty. However, her expression at the moment was rather haggard, and the fear in her eyes made her look quite miserable. The student seemed surprised at the sudden appearance of Bai Zemin, who had opened the door with a bang. She unconsciously looked inside the room, and when she saw the mess inside, was shocked. The place was a mess with splinters of wood everywhere, as if a hurricane had hit there. "Do you need anything?" Bai Zemin asked as he looked at the girl 1 or 2 years younger than him. Sorry." The girl apologized for something that Bai Zemin didn't understand and continued quickly, "Big brother Bai, some of the teachers, Big Sister Shangwan, Big Brother Chun, and the rest are about to have a meeting to decide what to do next. Therefore, they would like you to participate as well." This student's name was Kai Jingyi, and before the world changed, she was a student of international relations. She was very smart about human relationships and emotions. Now that everything changed, Kai Jingyi was also clear that she would be more likely to survive by following someone powerful. At the same time, it was essential to be careful not to offend anyone, because the rules would not necessarily remain the same as before. Hearing her words, Bai Zemin was silent for a moment before nodding. "All right. Thank you for informing me. I'll be there in a moment." He was not surprised that the girl in front of him knew his name. After all, he had worked. It was only natural that someone would start spreading his name around, especially those people whose lives he had saved. Kai Jingyi quickly excused herself and left. She could sense that the young man's mood before her was not particularly good, so she was worried about saying the wrong word. Before Bai Zemin could say anything, Lilith advised, Bai Zemin, remember that the world you live in has changed and will no longer be what it once was. Although it might not be so obvious now, since it is only the beginning of a new era, gradually people will change. Be careful of the people around you, or your death might not be caused by a monster or mutated plant. Bai Zemin looked at her silently, pondering her words. After several seconds, he nodded slowly and thanked. Thank you for your advice. I will remember it. Lilith threw him a flying kiss and gave him a charming smile in response. Bai Zemin didn't dare look at her for too long and quickly closed the door behind him as he walked away in the direction of the basketball court. At his reaction, Lilith giggled softly, causing her ample breasts to sway invitingly. Fortunately or unfortunately, there was no man to witness such a wonderful, but at the same time dangerous spectacle. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. After Bai Zemin's nerves calmed down and the tension he felt on his body due to the constant dangers and seemingly endless battles, he finally paid more attention to the people around him and easily noticed many things on his way to the basketball court. Most of the people, regardless of whether they were male or female, teachers or students, had eyes filled with apprehension and looked at their surroundings with constant vigilance. Some of them even had signs of insanity, clutching their hair tightly and muttering incoherent things before they started laughing out loud, as if something funny had happened. Seeing all this, Bai Zemin couldn't help but agree with the advice Lilith had given him before. Unconsciously, he lifted his guard a notch higher, not wanting one of these people to stab him in the back. Bai Zemin had no intention of dying, let alone dying by the hands of another human. As he approached a corner far away from the rest, Bai Zemin saw Shangwan Bing Shui, Chun He, Peng Liang, as well as 4 teachers, 3 men and 1 woman. Nigerian Ira Epsilon S. The woman was Jia Jiao, whom Bai Zemin had rescued earlier. Seeing him approaching, the group of 7 people stopped their conversation and looked at him with different emotions: gratitude, curiosity, indifference, kindness, mistrust, and many other emotions coming from different people. When he finally joined the group, Liang Peng smiled carelessly and greeted him casually. Yo, little brother Bai Zemin. Hey. Bai Zemin greeted him back with a brief nod. Although Liang Peng possessed terrifying strength, his thoughts seemed to be too simple. Now that teachers with the ability to think without being affected by the fear, as well as people capable of fighting, are here, let's start this meeting. Shangwan Bing Shui did not dawdle and immediately went to the point. She also did not give another glance to Bai Zemin, nor did she say anything about him keeping a room for himself. Currently, there were many people sleeping in the same place, and although they were not crowded together, it was definitely not as comfortable as having a private place to themselves. Even Shangwan Bing Shui and the rest had no such benefit. Many people were naturally dissatisfied with him taking such a large place for himself. It was just that no one dared to express it after witnessing his strength or hearing about it. As for Shangwan Bing Shui, she simply didn't care. Wait a moment. Bai Zemin stopped her before she continued. Shangwan Bing Shui frowned slightly, but said nothing and simply looked at him silently, waiting for his next words. If you want to gather people with the courage to fight and some ability, Vice President Lian's son should be here too, Bai Zemin pointed out. Oh, Shangwan Bing Shui's beautiful blue eyes had a strange glint in them when she heard his words. She looked in the direction of where Lian Sun stood, and seeing him smile charmingly at her filled her heart with disgust. I don't think that's necessary, Shangwan Bing Shui said coldly. Her tone contained a hint of mockery and disdain as she said, he even hid from me that he could fight those creatures, which means he is a coward. Such a person, instead of helping, will only become a burden in times of need. Bai Zemin simply shrugged his shoulders and did not comment any further. Then, let's continue. Shangwan Bing Shui frowned and explained her concerns. Currently, the storm is quite fierce. As each of us headed in this direction, saving other people in the process, it was inevitable that we and the others would get wet. Indeed, currently everyone was shivering with cold, and many people were sneezing with signs of possible colds. With their clothes completely wet in the cold weather, the body temperature had plummeted all at once, and the arrival of illnesses was only a matter of time. Even Shangwan Bing Shue's white dress was soaked and clung tightly to her seductive body. This had attracted the attention of the local men, regardless of whether he was a teacher or a student. Even the handsome and kind Chun, he could not help but sneak several glances at her secretly. Shangwan Bing Shue continued. At this rate, the arrival of illnesses like influenza and fever is only a matter of time. At this moment, we don't even know exactly the situation of the world outside the university. I tried to communicate with my family, but apparently there is some kind of problem with the signal. Chinny nodded. I also tried to communicate with my family, but got no results. Hearing their words, Bai Zemin's eyes lit up imperceptibly. Since they had the same problem, Lilith's words were probably real, and, although he didn't know if his family was alive, hope burned fervently. Then, I would like to form different teams to perform different tasks. Shangwan Bing Shue finally pointed out her real purpose. One team will be in charge of searching for clothes from the male dormitory and the female dormitory, saving the people who are still alive in the process. Another team will be in charge of going to the university pharmacy in search of cold medicine, fever medicine, and whatever else is possible. Chun He added, in the cafeteria, Bai Zemin found enough food to feed more than 100 people for a week. Even if we add more people, the rations should be able to last about 3 days. That's more than enough time for the army and police to make their move. Hearing his words, almost everyone let out a small sigh of relief. Even if the zombies were many, or even if those strange mutated creatures were powerful, in the face of the power of modern firearms, they were nothing to fear. Only Bai Zemin and Shangwan Bing Shue had indifferent expressions and kept their own thoughts to themselves. Seeing that no one had anything against her words, Shangwan Bing Shue nodded and continued. Now we should form teams and divide tasks. The team should be formed in the best possible way to avoid unnecessary losses. Wait a moment. So far, Shangwan Bing Shue's speech and explanations were extremely logical. It was precisely for this reason that no one had interrupted her until now, and even the teachers only watched from the sidelines without saying anything about it. She was truly worthy of being the student association president of one of the most prestigious universities in the whole country. What no one expected, however, was that a voice would abruptly interrupt. Wait a moment. I'd like to move alone. Everyone's eyes automatically turned to the person who had just spoken with different expressions. Chun He had an expression that looked unsure whether to cry or laugh. Liang Peng looked too stupefied to react, and the teachers had different kinds of thoughts that their expressions gave away. On the other hand, Shangwan Bing Shue gave Bai Zemin a slightly weary look and said coldly, "You want to go alone? Are you crazy?" Bai Zemin remained unperturbed and did not care about the expression of the beautiful woman in front of him. Calmly, he slowly said, "Whether I am crazy or not, you need not worry about my mental health, Miss Shangwan." Jia Jiao, Bai Zemin's teacher, could not help but try to persuade him. "Student Bai, why don't you consider a little more? With the strength of the four of you together, you should be fine against anything, and the chances of survival would certainly be higher." Bai Zemin shook his head and said nothing more. Obviously, he had already made up his mind. It was a pity that none of these people knew him. Otherwise, they would know that once Bai Zemin took a decision, it was practically impossible to make him change his mind. You're just acting selfishly and risking your life pointlessly. Do as you please." Shangwan Bing Shue looked at him coldly. In fact, her gaze was so cold that it seemed to have the capacity to pierce into people's souls and freeze them completely. "Then that's what I'll do." Bai Zemin nodded calmly and turned to leave as he said, "Considering the current time, I guess this task will be left for another time. Tomorrow you can tell me what my task is. Good night, everyone." Without another backward glance, Bai Zemin left and disappeared to the end of the corridor. "He seems to be a pretty cold guy, doesn't he?" Chunny scratched his head and said with a forced smile. However, although he looked casual on the outside, inside he was incredibly surprised. Bai Zemin was the first man Chun he had met who was able to remain completely indifferent to Shangwan Bing Shue. Even Chun He himself, who was considered an outstanding man by countless people regardless of whether they were men or women, had fallen for her charms even though she never had that intention in the first place. Shangguan Bing Shui's heavenly beauty, her icy personality and otherworldly aura, coupled with her mysterious family background, undoubtedly made her the greatest beauty not only in the university. Even in all of Beijing, it was hard to find another woman who could compare to her. Forget it. Let's continue then. Shangguan Bingshui looked at Bai Zemin's slowly disappearing back and said coldly before withdrawing her gaze. She simply had good intentions and did not want anyone to die in vain. However, if that man wanted to act alone, she could do nothing about it and could only let him go to die alone. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Why do you seem so distant with those people? Lilith questioned when Bai Zemin returned. Even without being present, the group's conversation had been heard clearly by her. Bai Zemin picked up a chair and sat down across from her. As he looked at her, he smiled slightly and remarked, "Who is it that told me to be more careful of the people around me?" Lilith had a strange glint in her eyes. She narrowed her gaze at him and said slowly, No. Although in fact, I did tell you to be careful around other humans from now on. Your attitude towards that group and the rest of the people has been strange to begin with." An idea flashed in her mind, and Lilith couldn't help but point out, especially towards that woman named Shangguan Bingshui. Your attitude towards her is cold and distant, suspicious. Bai Zemin sighed lightly and closed his eyes as a bunch of memories flashed in his memory at lightning speed. Although those memories no longer hurt, the pain of the past could never completely disappear. A person's past was the foundation upon which the present rested and where the future was built. Slowly, he opened his eyes again. At that moment, several green letters flashed across his retina. Pain from the past, caution in the present, defiant towards the future. You have acquired passive skill, Stoneheart. Bai Zemin was taken aback when he read the message that had appeared out of nowhere. How had he suddenly acquired a skill? Seeing him dumbfounded, Lilith frowned slightly and asked in confusion, "Is something wrong?" Bai Zemin immediately snapped out of his daze and quickly shook his head as he said, "Forget it, Lilith. Why don't you tell me more about the skills and about the soul record?" Lilith looked at him deeply before finally sighing lightly. "All right, since you don't want to talk about it, let me explain a bit about the soul record then." Bai Zemin immediately sat up straight and focused entirely on her, pushing the matter about what had just happened to later. The soul record is an unknown entity that no one has ever come to fully understand. This seemingly formless entity reaches out to different worlds, setting in flux the mana that exists in these worlds and pushing the different races and species towards the path of evolution. Lilith explained slowly, choosing her words carefully. As you've already seen for yourself, when defeating enemies, an orb of light comes out of their bodies, and yours absorbs it. Bai Zemin nodded. In fact, even when he killed zombies, those orbs still reached him, even if they didn't give him benefits. Those orbs contain soul power within them. The soul record concentrates a small part of the defeated enemy's soul power and grants it to the winner. The defeated one becomes a source of evolutionary power for the victor, pushing the winner beyond. In addition to this, as long as the enemy's soul power is strong enough, the winner will not only get part of their power in the form of stats, there's also the possibility of getting treasure orbs or skill scrolls. That would basically be a fairly general and simple summary of the function of the soul record. As for what its true motive or purpose is, no one knows. Lilith paused and looked at Bai Zemin in silence. If she continued to talk about it, even 1 or 2 years would not be enough to explain everything. Bai Zemin took a few moments to assimilate the information before slowly asking, "Is there another method of acquiring skills other than skill scrolls obtained from different enemies?" "There is." Lilith nodded and explained, "Aside from defeating enemies, you can also acquire different active or passive skills depending on your lived experiences or qualities." Seeing him look at her with clear confusion, Lilith deepened her explanation. For example, a person who practiced martial arts from a young age would awaken a passive melee skill, and its level will depend on that person's technique. On the other hand, if a man had problems with his sexual orientation, he would awaken a passive skill that makes him immune to female charms. She smiled playfully at him and pointed out, I know someone like that, so if that happens to you, don't worry. I won't discriminate against you. Bai Zemin had finally understood many things that were unclear before. Although there were still many questions in his mind, there was no way he could ask them all together and process all that information at once. Therefore, it was better to go step by step in order not to make mistakes or get confused later on. However, when he heard Lilith's final words, he almost fell to the ground. My sexuality has no problems. You don't need to worry, he said with a grim face. Are you sure about that? Lilith stood up and approached him. She bowed slightly, barely showing a small part of her neckline, and almost unnoticeable to the eye. Her rose scent entered Bai Zemin's nostrils, and his eyes couldn't help but be drawn to that small patch of white skin. He swallowed audibly, and his breathing became slightly agitated as he began to lose control over himself. It looks like there's really no problem with your sexuality. Lilith stopped toying with him and returned to her seat before looking at him with a smile that was hard to comprehend. Bai Zemin bristled with embarrassment and stood up. He moved away from her and laid down against the wall in the corner. Seeing him act like that, as if he was a child who was wronged by his parents, Lilith couldn't help but chuckle as she said, Oh, don't be angry. I was just making sure you weren't lying. But Bai Zemin didn't answer her. He focused his attention on the green letters flashing in his retina. Stone Heart, 3rd order passive skill. Level 5. It becomes extremely difficult for people not close to you to move your heart and shake your emotions. This effect is especially strong against the opposite sex. As a side effect, your love and affection for those close to you grow exponentially. Looking at the description of the skill, it would be a lie to say that Bai Zemin was not surprised. However, the surprise was not so much after hearing Lilith's explanation earlier. The soul record clearly creates skills depending on the qualities of each person, further adapting that person to evolve and paving his or her path. Any strength or any personality characteristic of a person was categorized as a skill as long as the trait interfered in any way with the possessor, regardless of whether it was a positive or negative trait. Due to certain past events, Bai Zemin's personality had become very indifferent towards people, and to some extent, he only cared for those close to him. However, he had not reached the point of possessing a stone heart where even a drop of water would find it difficult to enter. Obviously, this strange entity called soul record could also enhance a person's traits and take them to a higher level than normal. Bai Zemin estimated that this could also be one of the side effects of mana. However, from his current point of view, it did not seem to be a very useful skill. It did not contribute strength in any way, nor was it an active skill that would allow him to make use of supernatural powers, such as his blood manipulation. After hesitating for several minutes, Bai Zemin asked, Lilith, between an unclassified skill and a first-order skill, which one is better? Lilith, who was silent, was surprised to hear his voice again, and even more surprised to hear his question. However, she soon seemed to understand something when she softly exclaimed, You asked this because of your skill blood manipulation and your passive skill special forces soldier, right? Bai Zemin opened his mouth, wanted to say something. However, the next instant he regretted it and simply said, That's right. Although Lilith had helped him a lot so far, Bai Zemin could not trust her completely. Even if he didn't know how strong Lilith was, at least hiding one or two things from her, especially skills that appeared without warning, temporarily might be better from his point of view. When the trust between them grew, he might tell her about his private issues if she didn't do anything to betray him. For now, it was better to be safe early than sorry later. Skills are separated into 5 levels, from level 1 to level 5. Lilith thought for a moment before slowly explaining. When an unclassified skill reaches the highest level, in other words, level 5, that skill acquires the right and the possibility to evolve into something more powerful. Bai Zemin, focus on your blood manipulation skill for a moment. Bai Zemin quickly did as she told him, and the results showed immediately. A window with many green letters flashed in his retina, displaying a message. Blood manipulation, first order skill, level 5. This skill can evolve to the next level if the following requirements are met. Collect 100 liters of blood from 50 enemies level 5 or higher. 0 out of 100. Collect 10 liters of blood from 5 first-order enemies, 0 out of 10. Collect 1 liter of blood from 1 second-order enemy, 0 to 1. This is what it says here. Bai Zemin was surprised before he began to describe in detail everything the status window described. Although I was already expecting it. Really, how horrible. Lilith whispered with a bitter smile after hearing the requirements needed to evolve the skill blood manipulation. Alpha Nu Beta. Hearing her words filled with bitterness, Bai Zemin's heart couldn't help but sink when he asked, "Is something wrong?" Bai Zemin, your blood manipulation skill is much more powerful than you imagine. Lilith took a deep breath before speaking in a serious voice. After defeating an enemy for the first time after the arrival of the soul record, depending on the level, the qualities of the defeated enemy, as well as luck, a skill roll will definitely drop no matter what. From the corner where he was sitting, Bai Zemin stared at her. His eyes from the darkness looked exceptionally bright, a proof of how focused he was currently. The qualities of a normal human, at their maximum, definitely did not exceed 10 stat points before the advent of the soul record. However, due to your high magical power, your body and physical conditions were slightly higher than normal. Lilith revealed, and after thinking for a moment continued, a normal level 2 monster is generally twice as powerful to a normal person, so unless that person is very lucky or knows and possesses some means to defend themselves, that person will definitely die. Now do you realize how lucky you were to be able to kill that level 5B? She finished with a serious question. Bai Zemin couldn't help but nod unconsciously. If it wasn't because all the circumstances were in his favor, as well as a stroke of luck back then, he definitely couldn't have killed that level 5 big B. Due to the characteristics of the normal bee, when evolving the bee needed blood to evolve, and you, by defeating such a monster with a significantly lower level, naturally acquired a very strong skill. Lilith said, "Although I know that my blood manipulation is strong, I don't think it's as terrifying as you describe it, no?" Bai Zemin couldn't help but point out, if his skill was as strong as Lilith made it sound, then shouldn't he be invincible? After all, Lilith's tone was truly surprised even now, several hours after seeing the blood manipulation skill scroll. You say that because right now you can only use that skill to do small things without great effect. When your skill starts to evolve. Lilith's eyes lit up with a hint of joy indiscernible to Bai Zemin before continuing. In my entire life, you're the first person that I know managed to acquire a first-order skill at its peak level. Even the leaders of the various higher existent factions were unable to do such a thing before they got to where they are now. When he heard this, Bai Zemin felt excited and couldn't help but ask while complaining, "Lilith, what is this lower existences and higher existences you've been talking about all this time? To be honest, it's a bit annoying to hear you refer to me as a lower existence all the time." Lilith blinked her two beautiful eyes slightly in surprise before shaking her head and saying, "I apologize for that. No offense, it's just habit. I had no bad intentions, nor was it my intention to make fun of you. As for what the higher existences are, you don't need to know it temporarily. For now, just worry about reaching level 25 as quickly as possible." Hearing her sincere apology, Bai Zemin felt much better. At the same time, he couldn't help but think once again that this stone heart skill really didn't seem so useful. Since Lilith didn't say anything else, Bai Zemin also had no intention of asking any more questions temporarily. Instead, he closed his eyes, wanting to sleep. However, his mind was filled with thoughts that impeded him from sleeping comfortably. To be completely honest, Bai Zemin longed to rush off to find his family. However, such a thing was too unrealistic given that his family was currently on the other side of the city. Beijing was a very big city, even bigger than some countries in the world. Even in normal times, it took many hours by car to get from the university to his home, not to mention now that the outside world was filled with chaos. God only knew how many roads had been blocked with all kinds of transports, zombies, and other wandering creatures. In the midst of such conditions, even a month of travel was not necessarily enough, considering that he would have to fight countless battles to make his way through. Therefore, Bai Zemin had no choice but to restrain the growing urgency to venture out in search of his family. After all, if he died, nothing would make sense. At the thought of his family, his eyes filled with tears again, and he could only barely restrain himself from crying a second time. Bai Zemin looked at his stone heart skill and couldn't help but inwardly groan. Damn thing, you're no good with this seductive woman, but you affect my heart now. As the rain poured down like a torrent and the sound of thunder made the walls of the building tremble softly, exhaustion slowly overcame him, and before he knew it, he fell asleep. I will wait until you trust me, boy, Lilith whispered with a complicated smile as she watched him sleep on the floor. Although she did not know what kind of skill he had acquired, it was impossible for Bai Zemin, inexperienced and only 20 years old, to easily mislead Lilith, who had experienced countless hardships and met all kinds of people throughout her life. Lilith's explanation of the skills was very helpful to Bai Zemin. This was because although she had not explicitly told him that a third-order skill was better and more powerful than a first-order skill, he could easily draw conclusions based on what he currently knew and could observe. Apparently, his recently acquired passive skill was a more powerful skill than it appeared at first glance. Although it was temporarily impossible for Bai Zemin to be sure how powerful the passive Stoneheart was, considering that it was a third-order skill, and at its maximum level, it should not be a useless skill. The problem with passives was that, unless the exact circumstances were present that were necessary for a passive skill to shine and show its brilliance, it was extremely difficult to know whether it was useful or not unless the description of the skill was extremely clear and simple about its function. Because Stoneheart did not seem to have any use against Lilith, Bai Zemin had gone to sleep thinking that it was a skill without much value in battle or other aspects. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. After several hours of comforting sleep, Bai Zemin opened his eyes once again and slowly stood up. Although his stamina was almost full before he went to sleep, the mental fatigue he had accumulated throughout the day was nothing to scoff at. After all, he had experienced a constant up and down of emotions while fighting practically without rest. Sleeping on the floor really isn't the best option. He complained with a bitter smile as he felt his bones creaking one after another. Good morning. A lovely voice sounded next to him, startling him momentarily. Looking to his right, Bai Zemin saw the beautiful seductress Lilith sitting on a chair 2 or 3 meters away, looking at him with a smile apparently natural. Good morning to you too. He replied a little dazed and couldn't help but think that sleeping on the floor wasn't so bad if such a beautiful woman greeted him as soon as he opened his eyes. He was about to ask if the higher existences, as she referred to herself, needed to sleep or not when a soft knock on the metal door interrupted his words. Followed by the knock, a gentle and caring voice continued. Big brother Bai, big sister Shangwan, and the rest would like to distribute breakfast. Bai Zemin recognized the source of the voice easily. It was the same girl who had talked to him yesterday. Apparently, she feared that he was sleeping and that her call had disturbed him since her voice was so low that if it were not for the fact that Bai Zemin had been constantly evolving, he could not have heard at all. Without saying anything, Bai Zemin opened the door and said slowly, I understand. You can go and tell Miss Shangwan that she can bring the students now. Kai Genie nodded hurriedly and went to retransmit his words. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The cafeteria was big enough for 100 people to eat inside if they squeezed in a little. Because there were not enough tables and chairs as a result of the destruction caused by the zombies and by Zemin yesterday, many students had no choice but to sit on the floor while eating their breakfast with fervor. Most of them had not eaten anything since yesterday afternoon and really felt as if they were going to starve to death at any moment. The atmosphere inside the room was extremely gloomy, and if it weren't for the electric light still being on, many people probably couldn't help but cower in fear. Add this to the rain lashing the woods that covered the windows and the terrifying creatures roaming outside. No one dared to speak too loudly for fear of attracting unwanted attention. Since Bai Zemin didn't like being around people too much, when everyone went to the cafeteria, he moved to the basketball court and sat quietly while eating a piece of cake. The current situation was bad, to say the least. Not only were they cut off from the outside, but they were also right in the middle of the university campus. Beijing University had approximately 1 to 2 million students in the past, and although they did not all attend classes at the same time, as there were 2 rotations, such a large number of students was proof enough to show just how big the campus was. If a person wanted to travel from the center of the campus to the exit, a 30 to 40-minute walk was not unusual. It was for this reason that 90% of the students traveled via bicycle or other transport. However, riding a bicycle in this new world was no different from courting death. Even a normal vehicle was not a good choice. As he ate his meal with a frown, thinking of countless matters, a series of footsteps in his direction momentarily distracted him. Looking towards the source of the sound, Bai Zemin saw the handsome and skillful Chun He, the beautiful and powerful Shangwan Bing Shui, as well as the strong and seemingly simple-minded Liang Peng, walking towards him with varying expressions. "Good morning." Chun He was the first to greet him. Bai Zemin had to admit that with how handsome Chun He was, as well as his dexterity, good demeanor, and kindness, being a magnet for women was only natural. "Good morning to you all as well." Bai Zemin returned the greeting. After taking a last bite of the cake and finishing it in one mouthful, he asked, "Is something wrong?" From Shangwan Bing Shui's slightly frowning expression, Bai Zemin felt that something must have happened for this cold and indifferent woman to show a worried face. Shangwan Bing Shui looked at him for a moment before nodding and explaining, "Actually, there is a problem. Currently, 15 students have a fever, and there are another 20 who are in the process of catching a cold. If we don't get medicine soon, things could get more troublesome." Bai Zemin frowned as well when he heard her speak. After spending a whole night with their clothes and body completely wet from the freezing rainwater, getting sick was just natural. It was just that he didn't expect that only one night later, more than 30 people would present problems. If it continued like this, it would be hard for when everyone wanted to leave to take even weaker students than they already were by nature. Although Bai Zemin was indifferent, he was not a bad guy, much less a cruel person. There was no way he would casually let other humans die in the mouth of a mutated dog or a huge mosquito. If he was that kind of person, he wouldn't have rescued more than a dozen people on his way to the gym. After thinking for a moment, he stood up and picked up the sword lying next to him. "What are you going to do?" Chun He asked, dumbfounded. "I said yesterday that I would move by myself." Bai Zemin replied as he arranged his meager belongings. Going to the male dormitory and then traveling to the female dormitory to save people is a task that a large group like the 3 of you together could do better than me. In that case, I'll go to the pharmacy to get medicines now. Although the sooner the medicines were obtained, the better it would be for everyone, Shangwan Bing Shui couldn't help but remark, "Are you really going alone now? The storm is still raging and dangers lurk everywhere. I still think it's better if we form teams or if we all move together." Although Shangwan Bing Shui didn't particularly like Bai Zemin, she still didn't want him to die just like that. Not only was he a human just like all of them, but he was also brave enough to fight, and his strength was something that could not be ignored either. Precisely for these reasons, she insisted that he should not move alone. From a logical point of view, Shangwan Bing Shui was right. After all, moving alone with such horrible weather, the chaotic world, and countless unknown dangers as well as misinformation, was no different from dancing with the Grim Reaper hand-to-hand. Bai Zemin naturally knew this as well. He looked at her for a moment before shaking his head and slowly saying, "Miss Shangwan, I know you don't like me. To be honest, I don't like you very much either. Still, I know you mean well, so I thank you for that. However, you don't need to worry about my safety." Bai Zemin walked towards the exit and finished his sentence in a low voice. "At least until I find my family, I have no intentions of dying in the mouth of some dog or any cat." As to whether Shangwan Bing Shui, Chun He, and Peng Lian heard him or not, he neither knew nor cared. The wind hit him fiercely as he opened the metal door leading to the exit, and the rain fell on him like a wild torrent. Only a few seconds were enough for his head and the front of his body to be completely covered in it. Bang! With a loud bang, Bai Zemin closed the door behind him and disappeared into the thick fog. However, with the loud sound of thunder, the sound he had just caused did not attract the attention of any particular creature. "How cold!" Bai Zemin shivered fiercely when he felt the cold temperatures of the outside world. Although the interior of the sports center wasn't particularly warm, the building insulated the strong gusts of near-freezing wind and protected the body from the constant fall of water coming from the clouds. While it was true that Bai Zemin's body had gone through many improvements since the day before, the day the world had become a mess, his stamina and health were his two lowest stats so far in regards to the cold. He wasn't much different from a normal person, just slightly above comparatively. While your strength increased exponentially, hardening and boosting the power of your body's muscles, if you want to become more resistant to different environments as well as to prevent possible diseases among other issues, your stamina and health stats are the most important. Lilith explained as she walked beside him. Unlike Bai Zemin, who was already completely soaked beyond salvation, there was a small barrier covering Lilith's body completely, so she was as beautiful and sensual as ever. Not even a single drop of rain had touched her body. "Lilith, can't you cover me too?" he asked with a bit of envy. The water and wind really were too strong. His body temperature had plummeted only after several minutes, and his stamina was drying up much faster than normal as a result of the strong winds. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." Lilith shook her head with a bitter smile and explained, "To be honest with you, except for giving you some information, it will be better for you if you assume as if I'm not here. Unless someone attacks me directly, I cannot use my power in any way to help anyone or harm anyone in this world, or the soul record will revoke most of my soul power immediately as punishment." The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth twitched several times when he heard it. Although from the beginning he had not expected to receive Lilith's help, hearing her directly say that she could do nothing but act as a source of information still surprised him. "You're basically useless, aren't you?" After so long of being teased and tempted by her, Bai Zemin couldn't help but counterattack, taking advantage of the moment. However, who was Lilith? An existence with countless experiences. She nodded and made a sorrowful face as she said in a regretful voice, "That's right. I'm just a pitiful, useless woman who has nothing else to do but provide information that would sooner or later be discovered by you." "Got it. How about I use my body to redeem myself?" Bai Zemin's face turned pitch black when he heard Lilith's words. With no intention of replying to her, knowing that it would only end in his loss, he advanced and casually decapitated two zombies wandering under the storm. The two zombies were decapitated with such ease and in two extremely fluid movements. It was as if Bai Zemin was venting his powerlessness on them. Seeing the dark expression on his face and seeing how he was clenching his teeth while killing the zombies, Lilith couldn't help but point out, "Oh, could it be that you have opened your eyes to violence?" With agile movements, and as if he had done this for countless years throughout his life, Bai Zemin claimed the lives of 5 other zombies that had come out of a nearby building as he replied, "That's right. Violence is fun. One day I'll kick your ass too." "Kia." Lilith let out a delighted yell, and her face flushed as if she was a woman who knew nothing about life. She looked at Bai Zemin through her long eyelashes and whispered, "Instead of kicking me, I would rather you spank me with your big hands." Bai Zemin, he, who was killing zombies like that, as if it was nothing, lost his balance and almost fell to the ground when he heard the words of the seductive woman beside him. In his mind, an extremely depraved scene flashed, and he had to shook his head fiercely to bring himself back to reality. Wisely, he decided to stop teasing her and continued moving forward. Seeing him silently admit defeat, Lilith giggled out loud, causing her big assets to show off their beauty and charm to the world. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The university pharmacy was located in a westerly direction from where the gymnasium was located. Normally, a 10-minute walk was enough to get there. After all, the pharmacy that contained most of the medicines and healing measures was most needed by people who played sports and were susceptible to injuries during training. RAO. But if a normal person wanted to reach the pharmacy under such environmental conditions and with so many dangers, he or she would definitely die miserably without even knowing what had happened to him or her. Even Bai Zemin did not dare to act rampantly. The fog was so dense that it was difficult for him to see more than 5 meters in front of his eyes, and this was already amazing on its own. A normal person without as many upgrades as Bai Zemin probably couldn't even see their own nose at this moment. While advancing with careful but constant and solid steps, Bai Zemin suddenly felt a strange movement from his left side. Not caring about anything but his own safety, he directly kicked with all his might in that direction. His left leg had turned into a whip-like weapon. His 69 agility points cut the surrounding mist in two, and his 55 strength points completely blasted out as he felt his leg hit something hard. Roar! The enemy roared in pain and was sent flying several meters away. Although it was only for a split second that the surrounding mist was forced back by his strong and swift movement, Bai Zemin managed to see the silhouette of his enemy before sending it flying, causing it to disappear into the mist again. The enemy turned out to be a cat the size of a leopard. That cry of pain sounded more like a tiger's roar than a cat's meow. Bai Zemin was stupefied. His movements stopped completely, and he concentrated on the movement of the surrounding mist, as his eyes were not too useful under such conditions. If it was before he learned the passive skill Special Forces soldier, Bai Zemin would have already been killed by the earlier attack of the leopard-sized cat. After all, his combat experience was deficient, and losing most of his vision would make it incredibly difficult for him to sense and dodge such a surprise attack. However, now not only could he sense the attack, but instead of dodging, he managed to make a last-second counterattack. The strange, huge cat was even faster and more agile than a mantis that Bai Zemin had killed yesterday. Adding to the surrounding mist, he had no way to use his blood manipulation skill, since he didn't even know where the enemy was. Unlike animals, humans did not have a particularly strong sense of smell in comparison, and now that animals had become powerful beasts after evolving, their senses have been amplified countless times more than in the past. Swoosh! Almost 5 minutes after standing in the same place without moving, a practically imperceptible swooshing sound was covered by the sound of the storm. However, Bai Zemin's battle instinct had taken a quantum leap after learning the Special Forces soldier skill, so such a sound did not manage to escape him. In a split second, 2 blood-red eyes appeared in front of Bai Zemin, and a pair of coldly glowing claws pointed towards his head with the intention of slashing his neck. Swoosh! Boom! A sharp flash shone, followed by a mighty thunderclap that illuminated the surroundings and shook the ground slightly before everything returned to normal. You have acquired the soul power of Great Mutated Cat, level 23. Agility plus 17, Stamina plus 12, Magic plus 10, Mana plus 10. You have leveled up and reached level 14. You get plus 2 status points to distribute freely. You have leveled up and reached level 15. You get plus 2 status points to distribute freely. Bai Zemin coldly looked at the body of the level 23 Great Mutated Cat that was cut into 2 parts with a swing of his Xianyuan sword and marveled at the feeling of power. From a certain point of view, this leopard-sized Great Mutated Cat was even more fearsome than the Great Fast Mantis, as its agility was superior and the environment played in its favor. However, Bai Zemin needed only 1 swing of his sword to end with its life. While it was true that the Great Mutated Cat was faster, and the mist, the sound of thunder, as well as the constant rain, blocked Bai Zemin's senses, except for its speed and sharp claws, the terror of this mutated beast could not compare to the Great Fast Mantis level 25. The Great Fast Mantis possessed 2 forelegs that were like 2 huge scythes capable of holding Bai Zemin's Xianyuan sword, which was a rare grade treasure for a certain period of time. In addition, the battle instincts of the Great Fast Mantis were much greater than those of the Great Mutated Cat. Furthermore, the Bai Zemin at that time was much weaker than the one who fought against the Great Mutated Cat. As if all of the above were not enough, the Great Mutated Cat had been seriously injured by Bai Zemin's earlier kick. After all, the cat was a creature that specialized in agility, but whose defense was lacking. So, when Bai Zemin's 50-plus strength points came into contact with the beast's weak body, several internal organs probably suffered the consequences, lowering the creature's threat by a considerable margin. After making sure there was no danger nearby, Bai Zemin crouched down and picked up a red orb that had fallen from the monster's body before quickly putting it away in his backpack. Bai Zemin did not delay and continued moving towards his destination. After another 5 minutes in which more than 20 zombies perished by decapitation at Bai Zemin's hands, he finally saw the small building where medicines and other medical-related items were kept. Bai Zemin kicked open the door, and a shadow shot out towards him. The shadow's speed was slightly above a normal person before the world changed, and would probably be the doom of any other human being. Even an evolved person could fall as the attack was too sudden. However, Bai Zemin was currently 8 times faster than a normal person before the arrival of the apocalypse. His reaction speed had become simply dreadful, and his guard was always up, so in the face of the sudden attack, he did not panic. Taking a step back, Bai Zemin kicked forward with all his might. His foot struck the shadow's chest. However, surprisingly, the shadow was not sent flying after being hit and only retreated a couple of steps. Bai Zemin was astonished. With his 55 strength points, that previous kick could easily kill a person after being hit in the chest. The shadow was actually a huge zombie. The zombie was over 2 meters tall, and its body was surrounded by fat that acted as a protective layer. Its 2 bloodshot eyes glared at Bai Zemin with fury, as if it could feel pain, and quickly charged towards him. The giant zombie's fist was slow in Bai Zemin's eyes. He took a step to the left at the same time as he kicked the zombie's front foot. The giant zombie, losing its supporting foot and with its forward momentum, fell heavily, creating a small bang when its body hit the ground. Bai Zemin advanced quickly, and instead of decapitating the creature, he stabbed with his sword directly into its brain. That way, although blood would flow out of the wound, it would not shoot out like a fountain. You have acquired the soul power of Zombie Wall Breaker, level 20. Strength plus 10, stamina plus 10, health plus 10. Although Bai Zemin was surprised that he didn't level up even once, his attention was soon drawn to a skill scroll. Health boost, unclassified passive skill, level 3. After learning this skill, it permanently increases health by plus 20 points. Oh, this is good. Bai Zemin was excited and quickly decided to learn the skill scroll in his hands. A passive skill that increased stats was no different from obtaining soul power from another living being. Moreover, considering that the boost was of 20 points, not just any insignificant creature would give such an amount of soul power. Bai Zemin couldn't help but wonder if Liang Peng had obtained a similar skill to boost his strength stat. Although he did not believe that his strength was in any way weaker and, in fact, he was confident in surpassing him, it was truly amazing that in such a short time, Liang Peng could lift and wield a hammer that clearly weighed over 200 kilograms as if it was nothing. The pharmacy was a multi-story building. However, Bai Zemin had no intention of inspecting the entire building. The first thing he did was to fill his backpack with fever medicine, cold medicine, medicine to relieve stomach pain, even medicine for muscle pain, and some vitamin pills. 10 minutes later, his backpack was filled with boxes containing all kinds of basic but essential medicine for any human being. Next, he found several plastic bags and then began to inspect the shelves one by one. As Bai Zemin searched for gauze, band-aids, alcohol, and other types of first aid utilities, he even kept a syringe and some doses of morphine that could be useful in emergencies. But suddenly, a wild idea that he had been ignoring until now flashed in his mind. A with diuresis sepsilin. Lilith, don't tell me that viruses also evolve with mana. If viruses also evolve, then not only was everything he was currently doing pointless, but countless people would die from now on due to diseases. In fact, it was likely that more deaths would be caused by diseases and not by other savage monsters. Fortunately, Lilith's next words eased his worries. You need not worry. Single-celled organisms, such as viruses, cannot resist mana, and their evolutive process is extremely limited, so the world's mana directly ignores them. Bai Zemin unconsciously let out a sigh of relief. If the case was as he had assumed, then he would have no choice but to find his family quickly and help them evolve so that their bodies would become more resilient. As for the rest of the people, Bai Zemin did not think about it. He did not even notice this fact and acted as if his thoughts were normal. Unknown to him, the effect of a skill he still considered useless was changing his perspective of the world little by little. After filling several bags with all sorts of items needed to provide first aid, Bai Zemin took out the red orb to see what it contained. Piercing glove. Normal treasure attacks performed with this weapon allow the user to pierce through the defense of almost any enemy below level 25. When equipped strength +5, this gauntlet was odd in that a 30-centimeter spike protruded from the tip, where the knuckles should be by default. Although +5 strength points was not as amazing as the increase of other items he had acquired so far, it was free power increase, so Bai Zemin equipped the glove with pleasure. Suddenly the ground began to shake slightly, and Bai Zemin quickly realized that this was not caused by the storm. What is that? As he approached a window, the fog seemed to be disappearing in some parts. However, the strangest thing of all was that instead of fog, a dense cloud of vapor was slowly ascending into the sky. Also, as if a giant was slowly advancing, the ground was constantly vibrating and the buildings were shaking lightly. Bai Zemin, as he watched the environmental change outside the window and prepared to leave the building for fear of its collapse, Lilith's serious voice sounded beside him. When Bai Zemin turned around to look at her, and for the first time since he met her, he saw a grave and even a little anxious expression on her face. Lilith looked out the window and warned, "You'd better get ready because this could be your first life and death battle. If you win, you will undoubtedly become stronger. If you lose, then your path can only end here." Since Bai Zemin met Lilith, only about a day had passed. Although it was not a long time, his mind had already formed a small idea of the kind of person she was most of the time. Playful, charming, even a little mischievous. As for kind, Bai Zemin restrained himself from thinking about that possibility since he didn't believe Lilith was helping him out of pure kindness. Still, it was undeniable that she had helped him on many occasions by providing him with information that, while he might have discovered on his own after some research, it was also true that time was precious in eras of chaos. However, this was the first time Bai Zemin had seen such a serious expression on her face, and, although he was not so sure, there even seemed to be a touch of anxiety in her voice. "I won't die. At least I have no intention of dying yet," Bai Zemin replied as he shook his head. Lilith was a little surprised to realize how calm he sounded when he said those words. She looked at him as he took off his backpack and left the plastic bags containing medicines hidden in a corner, and her eyes couldn't help but glint with a hint of praise and even a small glint of unfamiliar satisfaction. "You know, you really are a weirdo," Lilith pointed out as she walked beside him in the direction of the exit. "You think so? Well, I've been told that many times." Bai Zemin shrugged and held on tightly to his sword as his eyes flashed with a hint of resolve. "You really aren't afraid of dying? This time you really might die." She raised an eyebrow and reminded him, "I'm afraid to die. Of course I'm scared." Bai Zemin nodded impatiently and continued, "But what I'm afraid of is not death itself. What I'm afraid of is not being able to see Meng Qi and my parents again. What I'm scared of is not being able to help them when they need me. But I'm not afraid of death. For me, death is no different than eternal sleep, and you know what? I love to sleep." "You?" Hearing that he even dared to joke in such a situation, Lilith didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and a look of helplessness shone in her beautiful eyes. "My God!" As the heavy rain poured down on his body and lightning lit up the sky quite frequently, Bai Zemin looked at the scene in front of him and his heart squeezed slightly. The dense fog in the surroundings had disappeared, and a ring of at least 100 meters around was now visible. However, what surprised Bai Zemin was that in the middle of the building, there was a monster as big as an elephant. This monster had various parts of its body surrounded with yellow flames that danced to high temperatures, which erased the surrounding fog. Its body was about 3.5 meters long and was surrounded by a thick kind of armor that glowed as if it were metal. Its 6 legs were as thick as a door, and it had a powerful horn nearly 2 meters long protruding from its mouth. Since when did elephant beetles get so big and have flames around them? Bai Zemin felt his hair stand on end as he saw the giant insect slowly advancing towards him while looking at him with its 2 eyes filled with murderous intent. "Stop joking." Lilith struck him gently and warned, That's a monster that has already gone through its first evolution. That is a first-order monster. Besides, as you also realized, that insect already noticed you, so it will chase you no matter how much you run away. Bai Zemin nodded silently as he rushed towards another building nearby. With a heavy stomp, the ground beneath his feet shuddered softly, and using his 70 strength points, he jumped over 3 meters with relative ease. Such a feat would be impossible before the advent of the soul record and without the aid of soul power. But with the power of evolution available to all, the rules of the past were no longer written in stone. Upon reaching the top, Bai Zemin observed the large insect covered in flames approaching in his direction. The pressure he felt just from being watched by that pair of red eyes was so immense that he had to resist the urge to turn around and leave. Lilith tried to help him in every possible way so that he could survive and pass this test. So she quickly explained, upon reaching level 25, all living beings acquire the ability to choose a job or class. As you advance in order, the power of each living being becomes tremendously higher, and the difference is not as simple as adding 1 plus 1. The difference between level 24 and level 25 is as big as the difference between level 1 and level 24, if not bigger. An even bigger difference? Bai Zemin could not help but gasp when he heard this. He was very clear about how big the difference was between the current him and a level 1 person. It was like comparing a small ant to a shark. There was no comparison to begin with. Then what about yesterday's mantis? Bai Zemin quickly asked. In his battle against the great fast mantis, Bai Zemin had been in danger several times, and a single mistake would have cost him his life. However, he never at any time felt such immense pressure as he was feeling right now, as he came face to face against the giant elephant beetle. According to what Lilith had just said, the level 25 great fast mantis should already be a creature of the first order as well. But he wanted to know why the difference was so great. To obtain said class and then evolve to become a first-order existence, every living being needs to overcome a test and fulfill a challenge. Until said challenge is not overcome, all soul power received will be stored, and leveling up will not be possible. That mantis you killed yesterday was still just an evolved creature, but it had not yet taken the first true step on the path of evolution. Lilith cleared his doubt quickly. However, that giant beetle is definitely a first-order creature. Those flames around it must be its special skill acquired after successfully obtaining its job. Bai Zemin finally understood everything. He nodded and thanked her before half closing his eyes towards the incoming creature. The giant elephant beetle was currently less than 20 meters away, and strange roars came out of its mouth as it stared at him intently. The murderous intent exuding from its body was so great that even its own flames seemed to grow stronger. Obviously, this creature could sense the soul power inside Bai Zemin's body and was eager to devour him. Although Bai Zemin was barely level 15, because he had been fighting and defeating enemies of a higher level than him since the beginning, stealing some of their soul power in the process, his own soul power was extremely rich at this moment. If the giant elephant beetle could absorb it, it could definitely evolve even further. However, the giant elephant beetle was not the only one who thought like this. Bai Zemin licked his lips, and a flash of wildness flashed in his eyes for a split second before disappearing and hiding under that cold gaze. From the first moment he defeated that big bee, Bai Zemin felt drunk at the pleasant sensation of feeling his body and soul growing stronger. The feeling of his muscles hardening, his ligaments strengthening, his flesh becoming tougher, and his brain capacity becoming higher. Bai Zemin could feel it all. Humans were creatures that sought power by instinct. The history written in books was proof of this. Bai Zemin wanted power too, to survive, to live a better life, to protect his loved ones, to not have to bow his head to anyone, and to take revenge on those who dared to hurt his loved ones. Lilith thought he was silent because he was nervous or thinking about his next action. Therefore, she stood there, trying to give all her moral support at least. I wonder. Hearing his voice, she turned her face towards him and was so surprised that she, a higher existence, couldn't help her eyes from widening slightly. A big smile graced his face which, although for someone like Lilith was not particularly attractive, at that moment was very striking. "I wonder how much I'll grow after killing this beetle," he exclaimed. The surrounding mana moved at his will, and a magical power within his body burst forth completely, without holding back as he focused on his enemy only 10 meters away. Bai Zemin's body currently had a mana reserve of 134 points, and his magic points were equal. Before the soul record showed up on planet Earth, activating the world's mana and displaying each person's status window, it was precisely his magic stat that caught the attention of the beautiful and charming succubus Lilith. Until now, Bai Zemin had never used all of his magical power to the fullest since he never found himself in need of it. However, in the face of the approaching giant elephant beetle, he had no choice but to give his all if he wanted to survive. With a single thought, Bai Zemin spent his 134 mana points immediately and pushed all that mana with his 134 magic points towards the giant beetle. When a mana under his control flowed into the creature's body, Bai Zemin immediately activated his first-order blood manipulation skill. His face turned as pale as a sheet, and his whole body felt weak after the abrupt loss of his mana reserve. However, he endured and began to make the blood burn inside the monster while using all his magical power. The results were immediately evident. Roar! A sound similar to that of a wounded beast roaring came from the mouth of the 10-foot elephant beetle. When it was only 5 meters away from being able to attack with its giant horn, its movement stopped and it raised its head to the sky while writhing uncomfortably as if it was suffering the most terrifying pain of all torments. Bai Zemin's blood manipulation skill was indeed powerful, just as Lilith had mentioned earlier. It was just that until now, Bai Zemin had only faced mainly dead creatures that did not feel pain, nor did they know the meaning of the word scared. By controlling his mana to get inside the enemy's body, Bai Zemin could make use of all his magic to activate his blood manipulation. The problem with this was that the cost was too heavy, much heavier than Bai Zemin thought. The elephant beetle writhed in pain, and its giant body struck a nearby building. The seemingly sturdy and robust building's foundation couldn't even stand for 5 seconds before collapsing with a loud explosion and raising a cloud of dust. Before the apocalypse, humans had no mana inside their bodies. However, with the intervention of the soul record, Bai Zemin's mana points were especially high. Now that he had used all his mana to execute a powerful attack, he felt as if he had lost all the sugar in his blood, and his body felt extremely weak. However, he had no choice but to grit his teeth and hold on. His pale face, without a trace of blood, looked at his enemy, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth when he saw the 3-meter elephant beetle stand up again. Roar! The monster glared at him with murderous intent, and its 2 eyes seemed to spit flames of rage as it headed towards him with somewhat unsteady steps. Its body was stained with blood, and its armor-like shell had small cracks through which boiling blood seeped. When the blood came in contact with the yellow flames on its body, the liquid began to evaporate at astonishing speeds, rising in a gaseous cloud into the sky. Seeing this, Bai Zemin inwardly felt happy not to use external blood attacks, or else he would only be wasting mana. After all, flames could be considered the perfect counter to his blood manipulation skill. The wounded elephant beetle reached the building Bai Zemin was standing on and slammed its horn forward with all its might. Bai Zemin's face changed when he saw the creature's intentions, and he hurriedly jumped off the building to the ground and rolled to the side. Boom! As if a demolition machine had hit it mercilessly, the 3-meter-high building collapsed immediately and soon joined with the building previously demolished by the elephant beetle. Stones of all sizes flew everywhere, and, although Bai Zemin had rolled to the side at the first possible moment, he was still hit by a considerably large block of stone. Ugh! His body was sent flying 2 or 3 meters as he grimaced in pain, and a small trail slid silently from the corner of his mouth. If it wasn't for the fact that his muscles were much stronger than in the past, that cement block would have left him half dead, if not severely injured. Without giving him time to rest, the elephant beetle turned and rushed in his direction, while the fury in its gaze seemed to want to consume him alive. Although its defenses and attack power were quite high, Its internal body was weak like that of any other living being. Bai Zemin's previous attack had damaged its organs, its flesh, and much of its blood disappeared due to the high temperatures of its flames. As a monster that had already passed its first evolution, successfully becoming a first-order monster, the elephant beetle could be considered a small overlord in this area. Now that a weaker creature had injured it to such an extent, it was naturally furious. After seeing what the elephant beetle did to the building with its horn, Bai Zemin did not dare to fight it head-on. Taking advantage of the fact that his speed was superior to that of the wounded creature, Bai Zemin endured the feeling of weakness he felt after the abrupt loss of mana and gritted his teeth fighting against the pain as he ran in search of another building he could quickly climb. One running and turning into different streets, while the other relentlessly pursued and crushed everything in its path. Bai Zemin and the elephant beetle sought to end each other's lives in different ways. It was clear to Bai Zemin that he simply could not win in a face-to-face battle against the elephant beetle. All of his body stats were below the creature, except for his agility. Therefore, to survive and win, he had to make use of his intelligence. After running mercilessly after its hated enemy for almost 10 minutes, the elephant beetle had demolished more than 7 buildings of different sizes. However, as a consequence, a look of exhaustion flashed in its eyes. The constant loss of blood was something the creature could not bear, and, although its flames were a powerful defensive skill, the elephant beetle could not use it to attack, and therefore only served to keep its enemies away from its body. However, to keep its skill active at all times, the elephant beetle had to expend too much mana, and after so many powerful attacks, its stamina was also quickly running out. Bai Zemin also noticed the change of pace in the creature's steps and hurriedly jumped towards a nearby building, hoping to end this battle as quickly as possible. His own stamina had dropped by more than half, and he had only recovered a bit more than 20 mana points. After reaching the top of the building, Bai Zemin looked up to see the elephant beetle prepare to strike with its powerful horn once again. However, instead of jumping to the side, Bai Zemin jumped with all his might towards the giant beetle. Boom! Another building fell. However, its previous attack had created a big opening in its defenses, and the elephant beetle could not prevent its hated enemy from landing on top of its shell. Bai Zemin had just landed on the mutated insect's upper body when a wave of fire assaulted his lower body at once. It hurts. It king hurts. He couldn't help but scream in pain as his face constricted horribly at the sensation of being burned alive. He felt as if his lower body was suddenly submerged in a pool of burning lava, and such a feeling of pain was driving him crazy. Although his defensive cloak protected his body, from his knees down, he had nothing capable of fighting off the elephant beetle's fire. Bai Zemin could feel his legs starting to burn little by little, and the only reason why they had not yet completely caught fire was thanks to the treasure normal velocity boots he was equipped with. However, he could clearly feel the boots melting rapidly without being able to withstand the heat. Gritting his teeth and fighting the urge for his tears to fall involuntarily from the overwhelming pain, Bai Zemin ran at full speed until he reached the creature's neck. The giant elephant beetle's entire body was covered by an extremely hard shell. If Bai Zemin wanted to break through its defenses, he would need a lot of time, and that was what he lacked at the moment, not what he had to spare. However, the junction between the head and the rest of the body, the creature's neck, was not surrounded by that shell. After all, this would limit its natural movements. Bai Zemin raised his sword and slashed fiercely downward, tearing off a large chunk of flesh in the process. Blood splattered everywhere, and fiery steam, caused by the struggle between the liquid and the flames, surrounded him. The elephant beetle sensed danger of death, and its body began to shake violently as roars of pain escaped from its mouth. For safety reasons, Bai Zemin immediately held his breath as the blood evaporated after coming into contact with the heat of the flames. He had no way of knowing if this monster's blood had obtained poisonous attributes of some kind after eating different organisms to evolve to where it was currently. In any case, with his current stamina, he could endure several minutes without breathing for several minutes without experiencing any kind of problem, enduring the overwhelming pain that enveloped the lower part of his body and slowly began to affect the other parts. Bai Zemin raised his sword and fiercely slashed the neck of the huge creature again. Another large chunk of flesh was cut in half, and an even larger wave of blood than the previous one came out of the monster's body. The pain was so great that the giant elephant beetle began to run while roaring in pain. Boom! The huge, sturdy body of the elephant beetle hit a building, knocking it down in the process. Several stones of all sizes flew everywhere, and Bai Zemin was hit by several of them. His face constricted even more in pain, and a big stone struck his head, making him feel dizzy. He felt his whole world spinning, and had to bite his lips with all his strength to the point of breaking them to fight the drowsiness that had suddenly overwhelmed him. A thick line of blood slid silently from his forehead to his left eye, partially covering his vision. Because the rainwater could not overcome the flames of the elephant beetle, the blood over his left eye accumulated until everything within his left vision range turned crimson red. Using the pain and hatred he felt after being injured to such an extent, Bai Zemin not only did not stop his attacks. On the contrary, he began to slash more and more ferociously. The Xianyuan sword in his hands had become a whirlwind of blades that cut large chunks of flesh per second. The giant elephant beetle was very strong. Its defense was powerful, and its horn was strong enough to knock down minor buildings. However, its mobility was its greatest weakness. With Bai Zemin on its upper body, the giant elephant beetle had no way to reach that area, so it could only do its best to force him down from it. Roar! Like a beast that had gone completely berserk, the mutated beetle began to writhe ferociously as it slammed against every nearby building in sight. Some of these buildings collapsed immediately, while others held firm even after being hit several times. Bai Zemin felt his head spinning, and the weakness his body and mind felt was slowly overwhelming him to the point where even his right eye began to see his surroundings blurred. With his left eyesight practically blocked by the blood dripping from his head and his right eyesight failing due to exhaustion, Bai Zemin had turned into something similar to a machine. With the glove's protruding thorn firmly stuck into the monster's flesh to prevent himself from falling, he slashed with his sword relentlessly, knowing that stopping meant the end of his path. The thought of not falling to his death was the only thing that kept him steady. Both living beings fought for several minutes for their own survival, trying to defeat the other for a higher evolution. The sound of constant explosions caused by more than 20 buildings collapsing from the giant elephant beetle's mad charge had defeated the sound of rumbling thunder. The area surrounding the pharmacy had become a dead zone. Crushed zombies with their deformed bodies and countless cement blocks were scattered everywhere. Some of them with their brains intact struggled with all their strength, tearing their legs away from the rest of their bodies as they crawled towards the source of the sound. The blood of over 200 zombies in conjunction with the huge amount of blood lost by the giant monster had accumulated to the point where even the fierce storm had no way of washing it away as easily as before. After what seemed like an eternity, the wild movements of the elephant beetle stopped and its charge stalled. After the constant loss of blood, after being attacked again and again in such a delicate and deadly area by Bai Zemin, the beast finally lost all its energy and collapsed to the ground. Boom! An explosion similar to that of a collapsing building shook the surrounding ground, and Bai Zemin's body was almost sent flying. However, although he was not sent flying, the price he had to pay was high. A heartbreaking cry of pain slipped out of his mouth as he felt the bones of his left hand cracking. To hold himself steady, Bai Zemin had no choice but to rely on his left hand as well as his piercing glove. However, suffering from such a sudden and abrupt impulse, his wrist that was not so flexible had bent backward. The flames on the giant elephant beetle's body had stopped as the beast could not withstand the energy consumption, and the new pain made Bai Zemin's mind clear for a moment. Making use of the sudden surge of clarity, Bai Zemin wielded his sword and slashed at an even faster speed than before. After cutting more than 50 times, several green letters flashed in his retina. Since the birth of all the chaos after the arrival of the Soul Record, Bai Zemin had never felt so happy to see those strange messages. His mouth opened and closed several times as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he was so exhausted that he did not manage to utter any words. Before the whole world went out of control, Bai Zemin was just a normal student who lived his daily life striving for a better future. Although he was still striving to secure a better future, everything had changed. The bones of his left hand had broken. His left eye had closed due to all the accumulated blood running from his forehead. Some of his dark hair had turned crimson red. His feet hurt and burned horribly. In his single open, I could hardly take in any information from the outside world. When had he ever suffered so much? Bai Zemin had once heard in the past that when the pain reached a certain point, the brain turned off those receptors as an automatic defense mechanism so that it was no longer possible to feel pain. Before he was not so sure about this, but now he had confirmed it. Although he was in terrible condition, his mind was so exhausted that he no longer felt any pain. The flames surrounding the elephant beetle shell were extinguished after its death, and the rain began to fall on the area once again after losing the burning heat that suppressed it. Standing over the 3+ meter creature, Bai Zemin could not help but lifted his face to the sky as he felt the raindrops falling on him. Although the battle was already over, his grip on the Xianyuan sword had not loosened, as this sword was the only way he had to feel safe at the moment. Tired, his feet wobbled, and he could not help but fall downward. In fact, he was so exhausted that he didn't even notice he was falling to the ground. All he felt was the wind in his surroundings, and that was it. However, fortunately for him, someone caught him just as he was about to hit the ground and make his already horrible condition even worse. An extremely soft body held him gently. The sweet scent of roses, so familiar, but at the same time so unfamiliar to him, enveloped his exhausted body, and as if it was the best medicine to relieve his situation, he couldn't help but breathe a bit more as if he was intoxicated. "Good job, Bai Zemin." A soft and innocent voice like that of a baby, without impurities, reached his ears. However, he could no longer distinguish what was what. "That was a wonderful victory. You can rest now." As if they were the words of his mother and most beloved being, Bai Zemin obediently closed his eyes as exhaustion finally defeated him and a smile rose unconsciously on his face.